Lord of Mysteries, Incarnation of Chaos by author Yu Shang Wu Wang Chuan. Chapter 376-400. Chapter 376. Roland first meets the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. Although he was also one of the 8 king of angels who followed the ancient sun god back then, compared to others, Hera Bergen's relationship with the ancient sun god was actually not that close. After all, Hera Bergen didn't follow the sun god from a young age like Osius, Leodoro, and Ouroboros, nor was he caught by the sun god when he was still a cub, basically accompanying the sun god in battles for most of the second epic, unlike Medici, who appeared as an angel mythical creature. Hera Bergen also didn't have the kind of special relationship with the sun god that Saussure, Adam, and Amon had, which naturally couldn't be separated. As the last king of angels to join besides the 2 Amons, although Hera Bergen, relying on his excellent qualities as a stand god, had already quietly taken a side as early as the second epic, contacting the sun god secretly before his former boss, the Dragon of Imagination, kicked the bucket. But compared to those who had special identities or had been by the sun god's side early on, there was always less closeness between Hera Bergen and the sun god, and more of the distance that only exists between superiors and subordinates. But Hera Bergen didn't think there was anything wrong with this. If people are too close, it becomes difficult to escape when accidents happen, and the same goes for gods and angels. Hera Bergen was a very rational person. He chose to follow the sun god partly because he was powerful enough and at his peak at the time, and partly because the sun god had good character. Compared to the ancient gods who would casually kill their subordinates or even descendants, the sun god could be called the top figure in terms of character, not just back then, but even among the gods now. Such a boss was highly rated by Hera Bergen. In fact, the years he worked for the sun god were indeed a good period in Hera Bergen's life. Back then, he didn't have to worry about his boss going crazy every day, didn't have to worry about outer gods invading. He could just handle his daily work and comfortably swim in the ocean of knowledge. Although he occasionally encountered small troubles due to conflicts with colleagues, overall, it wasn't a big problem. It can be said that even now, having become a true sequence 0, Hera Bergen occasionally still misses those days in the third epic, misses that exceptionally relaxed time, and wonders what everything would have been like if no accident had happened back then, if the sun god hadn't fallen. The former Hera Bergen didn't know, but he felt that those probably wouldn't have been difficult days. Perhaps he would still only be in King of Angels, but similarly, he wouldn't need to guard the star realm every day, sealing the cracks in the barrier, with little time left even for exploring the unknown. He wouldn't need to worry about how to survive the apocalypse a decade or so later, because someone would bear that burden, and he would just need to follow the other party's command, waiting for the day to rush to the battlefield. The current Hera Bergen felt the aura outside his divine kingdom, an aura that couldn't be more familiar, and for once, he felt nervous and hesitant. He didn't know how the sun god would view his betrayal back then. Although his choice to take the potion and become a god immediately after Osius made his move was entirely out of self-preservation, and he also knew that the sun god hadn't blamed Osius for this matter, Hera Bergen still felt nervous about it. After all, Osius's betrayal was ultimately due to God's control, a forced action, whereas his betrayal, even if for self-preservation, couldn't be erased. Rationally, Hera Bergen knew that the sun god wouldn't mind this matter, but emotionally, Hera Bergen couldn't convince himself. Not that he couldn't convince himself that the sun god would forgive him, but that he couldn't convince himself to justifiably rationalize his betrayal back then with a clear conscience. Indeed, relationships between people shouldn't be too close. Hera Bergen twitched the corner of his mouth, revealing a bitter smile. His figure flashed, and he then appeared at the edge of his divine kingdom. As the gate of his divine kingdom opened, Hera Bergen saw the 2 people outside. His gaze first fell on Roland, and he offered a polite smile, saying, "A pleasure to meet you, Lord Lucifer. Perhaps you know my name. I am Hera Bergen, also known as the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. You can call me by my name directly or in any way you prefer. I apologize, I should have visited you myself, but unexpected matters have caused delays until now." Evidently having done his homework beforehand, witnessing the incident where the god of steam and machinery was attacked in his divine kingdom, and also witnessing the change in attitude of eternal blazing sun Osius towards Roland, Herr Bergen had long since regarded Roland as an existence on the level of an old one in his heart, adopting a low posture but not appearing humble. Roland quietly listened to his words, blinked, and said, "If you're really that apologetic, how about lending me 2,000 assistants?" Getting straight to the point, like the map of Yan State being too short to even wrap a dagger. Herr Bergen was stunned for a moment, clearly not expecting Roland to have this kind of opening style. It didn't quite match the intelligence he had gathered. Didn't Rosal say Lucifer was a serious person? This style doesn't look like the mature and steady type. Fortunately, as an ancient dragon who had lived through multiple epochs, Herr Bergen was well informed and experienced. He could even placate a lunatic like the Dragon of Imagination, let alone someone with only a slightly unconventional style. He immediately reacted and said, "May I know what kind of assistance you need?" Rosal has a saying, each profession has its own specialization. Although there are many talented individuals in the Church of Knowledge who are proficient in various fields, different people ultimately specialize in different areas. Well, let me think. Roland pinched his chin and pondered for a few seconds, then listed his requirements like rattling off a menu. After all, you can never have too many professionals, and the development of the reform movement also needs the participation of high-level intellectuals. Not to mention, they can't possibly write the compulsory education textbooks for all stages themselves in the future. Herr Bergen quietly listened to Roland's diverse requirements, raising no objections. Instead, he professionally asked for more detailed information regarding some of Roland's requests and even offered more professional suggestions. After this discussion, Roland's gaze towards Herr Bergen changed. If he had originally looked at Herr Bergen with the eyes of someone viewing a stand god, then now Roland's gaze towards Herr Bergen carried a hint of respect for a study god. There was no doubt, Herr Bergen truly lived up to his title of God of Knowledge and Wisdom. The areas he just discussed with Roland were incredibly diverse, ranging from livelihood issues to systemic problems. Even in areas that Roland himself couldn't claim expertise in, Herr Bergen could still be called proficient. And Roland still held some respect for such a study god, with genuine substance. After all, he himself had struggled through the vast ocean of knowledge back then. Chapter 377, The Sun God and the God of Wisdom. Did I say something wrong? Herr Bergen, facing Roland's gaze which held a hint of respect mixed with surprise, was clearly a little unaccustomed to it, and couldn't help but ask, bracing himself. He really couldn't figure out why Roland was suddenly looking at him like that. After all, Herr Bergen found it hard to understand the unique reverence the people of Zhonghua had for academic gods. Or more accurately, Herr Bergen found it hard to understand that an existence like Roland would also respect a scholar. "No, I'm just a little surprised." Roland shook his head and said with a smile, "Among deities in the domain of knowledge, compared to Stiano, you feel more like a true scholar to me." Stiano is the true name of the god of steam and machinery. Herr Bergen was stunned for a moment upon hearing this. His expression then turned odd for an instant, as if he wanted to laugh but had to restrain himself. Then, Herr Bergen tried hard to make his expression return to normal and said, "We just specialize in different domains. When it comes to creations in the mechanical domain, steam is more specialized than I am." Roland fell silent for a second upon hearing this. Recalling the scene he had witnessed during his recent visit to the mechanical laboratory, he said tactfully, "I think knowing what to do without knowing why you do it cannot be called specialization." Roland really wasn't intentionally badmouthing steam. Although he didn't particularly like that old fellow, the other party was, after all, working for him now, and Roland was quite friendly towards his tools. Mainly, steam was truly disappointing. This wasn't to say that steam wasn't working properly in the mechanical laboratory, but rather that steam had completely given up his own brain, primarily just doing whatever Rosal said. Just as Rosal had driven the Industrial Revolution over 100 years ago, steam's avatar in the mechanical laboratory was also almost entirely relying on Rosal to push the experimental progress. It's not that steam himself made no contribution, it's just that he acted as a simulator, using his extraordinary abilities to help Rosal experiment with his various ideas, primarily embodying the concept of, although the child doesn't understand, the child is strong. Honestly, after watching for a while, Roland really wanted to say, "How about you two just swap paths?" Rosal should be the god of steam, while Stiano is clearly a foolish ruler who would abandon his kingdom for a beauty. Don't tell me, this might not be something you can't ship. Rosal becoming Luo's sire might not be impossible. Roland's thoughts wandered for a moment, mainly recalling Rosal's cross-dressing photo collection, referring to certain profane cards. Then he snapped back to reality, looked at Hera Bergen's indescribable expression, and said with a smile, "Sorry, I got a little distracted." "It's all right." Hera Bergen shook his head repeatedly, too embarrassed to say that he had also been a little distracted just now. Mainly, Hera Bergen had also subconsciously recalled Steam's various performances upon advancing to Sequence 0. Therefore, even Hera Bergen couldn't go against his conscience and say that the god of Steam was very skilled in the domain of Steam. After all, if the god of Steam were truly skilled in the domain of Steam, he wouldn't have been unable to develop even a little technology in the mechanical domain before Rosal's sudden arrival. After Rosal's fall, he even completely stalled the technological progress bar, creating a bunch of flashy but essentially not significantly advanced things. Previously, Hera Bergen hadn't thought deeply about this. He had only believed that any being who could become Sequence 0 had their extraordinary qualities. Now, he suddenly had a little doubt, perhaps there were also freeloaders among Sequence 0. No, generally speaking, we don't call such people freeloaders, we call them fated, European emperors. Perhaps Steam would have achieved greater success if he had taken the monster pathway, Roland said with a smile, seeming to have guessed what Hera Bergen was thinking. Hera Bergen fell silent, because he found that he couldn't refute it. Alright, now that we've finished talking about the 2000 assistants, next is time for reminiscing. Roland said this, completely acting like someone who enjoys watching a spectacle, and pushed the silent sun god towards Hera Bergen, instigating. After so long, don't you have anything to say to each other? Don't mind my presence, really, you can treat me like air. I promise I won't talk nonsense or spread rumors outside. While saying this, Roland's eyes were filled with a craving for gossip. He was truly someone who loved watching drama and eating melon, almost openly displaying his fondness for it. The sun god smiled helplessly, and without resistance, took a step forward following Roland's push. His gaze fell upon Hera Bergen, his eyes containing no resentment or rejection, only a faint smile. He said, "Although I should say long time no see, it still feels a bit strange. After all, in my era, we had just met." Upon hearing this, Hera Bergen's eyes flickered slightly, perhaps recalling something or perhaps not. He looked at the sun god, meeting those eyes whose color was very close to the sun, yet didn't feel scorching, only warm. He pursed his lips and said, "But for me, it has been a long time since we met, Lord Sun God." The sun god was stunned for a moment upon hearing this address, then showed a nostalgic expression and said with a smile, "It's been a long time since I heard you call me that. The last time was apparently during the second epoch. At that time, I was still a subordinate deity serving the dragon of imagination." Hera Bergen didn't refute but spoke along with the sun god's words. He looked at the sun god and said, "Because I saw your potential and wanted to pledge allegiance to you, I chose to approach you. Facts have proven that my choice was very correct. You are truly an existence very worthy of following, in every aspect. Can I interpret this as affirmation of me?" The sun god asked back with a smile upon hearing this. "More accurately, it's an affirmation of my judgment." Hera Bergen didn't refute or admit, but said. The sun god was stunned for a moment, then nodded with a smile and said, "Your judgment is indeed very good." The two then exchanged glances. Hera Bergen finally couldn't help but chuckle and said, "Actually, a long time ago, I wanted to make a joke like this with you, but I always felt it wasn't quite appropriate. After all, my relationship with you isn't as close as with others." Upon hearing this, the sun god rarely furrowed his brow and looked at Hera Bergen, saying, "Perhaps our relationship is indeed not as close as with others, but I don't think we are so distant that a joke cannot exist between us." The sun god wouldn't ignore the fact and claim that he and Hera Bergen were equally intimate, but the sun god also truly didn't feel that there was anything Hera Bergen couldn't joke about with him. He wasn't the type of very strict superior. In many cases, as long as it didn't involve some matters of principle, the sun god's personality was relatively gentle. Chapter 378, The Wisdom Dragon's Decision. Please forgive my caution. After all, before you, I followed anger-wide. Jokes were never a good word in that ancient god's kingdom. Hera Bergen said this, a hint of daze appearing in its eyes, likely recalling some unpleasant memories. This is not surprising, as Angerwide was not a kind superior. One can see a bit of this from the personality of the nightmare dragon Azurhad, the clone it created, also known as the familiar 008. After a moment, it recovered and looked at the sun god, continuing, although I can roughly see the difference between you and Angerwide, my past experiences still make me instinctively avoid these things. And when I let go of the past. Speaking of this, Hera Bergen paused, a hint of bitterness, helplessness, and even faint sadness showing in its eyes. It said, you were already entangled with God. How could I dare to joke with you back then? Who knew if I was facing you or God? The sun god fell silent. After a moment, he looked at Hera Bergen seriously and said, at least now you are facing me. At least at this moment, you can freely say anything you want to me. Upon hearing this, Hera Bergen pursed its lips. Its expression at this moment was very complex, as if a guess had been confirmed, as if a wish had been fulfilled, and also like looking at a dream that shouldn't exist. Hera Bergen then gave a bitter smile and said, sometimes I would think, if only you were another Angerwide. That way, when you fell, no matter what kind of betrayal it was, I could do it as a matter of course. That way. Hera Bergen looked at the sun god, its voice very low, as if speaking to the other party, and also as if speaking to itself, I could continue to be the god of knowledge and wisdom without any guilt. The sun god listened quietly to its narration, not showing any negative emotions because of Hera Bergen's words. He just looked at the other party and said, your actions back then cannot be called betrayal. You were just protecting yourself. The culprit is God. You don't need to bear any guilt for this. After a pause, the sun god continued, however, I'm sorry, Hera Bergen, you probably won't be able to continue being the god of knowledge and wisdom. This world needs God. Whether you are willing or not, when the time is right, I will take what I need. When the sun god said this, his expression was both somewhat apologetic and very firm. Whether he can revive or not, the true creator will likely regain consciousness in this era. If so, he will inevitably challenge the position of God. Only then, when facing the outer gods, will they not be powerless. When facing Roland, they will have more bargaining chips. Therefore, the future sun god will inevitably reclaim some characteristics and uniqueness. He did not intend to hide this attitude. In fact, Osius is very clear about this matter. The sun god's de facto eldest son has no objections to this, as he is truly fed up with the primordial God Almighty and doesn't really want to experience Roland's treatment because of it. You are indeed still the same, gentle and benevolent, yet cruel and tough. Hera Bergen was not surprised by the sun god's words. It just showed a slightly nostalgic expression. It even laughed and said, perhaps it is precisely because you are like this that you were able to achieve such a great feat back then. The sun god neither confirmed nor denied it. He just looked at Hera Bergen quietly and asked, so what is your answer, Hera Bergen? His voice was not cold or hard, but his attitude was very clear. The sun god has always been like this. When he should be gentle, he can be gentler than anyone, but on matters of principle, the sun god will absolutely not waver. I bet you are probably not as direct with others as you are with me. Hera Bergen did not directly answer the sun god's question, but sighed complainingly, saying, as expected, newcomers still can't compare to those who have followed you since childhood. The sun god paused, saying with a mix of helplessness and amusement, I am very sorry. So you admit it. Hera Bergen looked at him. The sun god neither nodded nor shook his head, just said, if Leodoro is unwilling, I will simply beat him up. This is not because my relationship with him is not close, but simply because different people should be treated in different ways. A perfect answer. You avoided my question but gave me a possibility. Hera Bergen said with emotion, then it finally became serious, looking at the sun god and saying, Mr. Grisha, before answering your question, I would like to ask you something. Speak. The sun god's expression also became serious. You will save this world, right? Hera Bergen looked directly into the sun god's eyes and asked. The sun god met its gaze without a void. He did not nod, but said, I am not sure if I can save this world, but I promise that until I fall, I will fight for this world. Hera Bergen was not surprised by this answer, but it was still in a daze for a moment. Then it smiled and said, I believe you. It closed its eyes, and when it opened them again, it seemed to have made a decision. Hera Bergen looked at the sun god and said, Lord, when you need it, I will offer everything you need, no matter what it is. Its voice was firm and serious. Hera Bergen made this decision both out of reason and emotion. Rationally, it knew it couldn't resist the sun god. Emotionally, Hera Bergen was even more certain that the other party was worthy of its trust. So hand it over. Hand over its trust, hand over its all. Choose as it did before, believing that he can bring this world a beautiful future. The sun god was also not surprised by this answer, but he was somewhat relieved. Although he had the resolve, even from an emotional standpoint, the sun god didn't really want to act against Hera Bergen. So, are you done chatting? Roland, who was watching from the side, finally spoke. He looked at the sun god, then at Hera Bergen, and suddenly said with a reflective tone. Old Jay, I was just musing recently that you've become a lonely old sun god. I didn't expect that in just half a day, you've already added to your faction. Is this the charisma of a savior? Upon hearing this, the sun god looked at him and said with a chuckle, isn't this good? You have a corner to dig again. His tone was clearly teasing. Indeed. Roland, however, looked thoughtfully at Hera Bergen. Seeing the latter feel somewhat creeped out, he smiled and said, So, Mr. Hera Bergen, are you interested in switching jobs to work for me? He asked so directly that Hera Bergen didn't react for a moment. After a while, it subconsciously looked at the sun god, clearly unsure how to respond in this situation. Chapter 379, The Church of Knowledge will be emptied sooner or later. The sun god shook his head helplessly and looked at Roland, saying, Please be merciful and leave me someone who can work. After all, I can't possibly let Ouroboros handle those complicated official duties. Can't you do it yourself? Roland raised a soul-piercing question. The sun god didn't speak, just looked at him silently, as if saying nothing, yet saying everything. Under that gaze, Roland actually felt a bit guilty, as he was a genuine hands-off boss. So, Roland coughed lightly and said, All right, I'll give you face, old Jay, but not one less than 20,000 assistants. Hearing this continuously rising number, the sun god couldn't help but glance at Roland and said with a slight chuckle, I remember Medici's initial request seemed to be for 20 assistants. Although the sun god did not directly participate in that meeting, he heard Saucerier's retelling afterward and naturally knew the origin of the 20 assistants. What's so new? The price went up. Roland said righteously, in the eyes of you, the sun god, is a god of knowledge and wisdom not worth the weight of 20,000 assistants. The sun god looked at him helplessly, not refuting, but simply saying, the Church of Knowledge probably can't spare that many people all at once. As one of the 7 orthodox deities, the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom naturally has more than 2 million people. Although the number of Beyonders is limited due to the law of conservation of Beyonder characteristics, the church members themselves also include a large number of ordinary people. Due to the atmosphere of the Church of Knowledge, even ordinary church members are basically top students on average, and it's definitely possible to gather 20,000 assistants from them. But even if only ordinary people are transferred, 20,000 is by no means a small number. Considering the positions these people hold and how to fill the vacancies after their transfer, it's truly not something the Church of Knowledge can accomplish in a short period of time to transfer so many people. It's okay, I don't require him to gather them all in a short time. The 20,000 assistants aren't needed now, just gather 200 people for me now. Roland said with a smile. He looked at Hera Bergen and continued, Can you do that? Hera Bergen nodded without hesitation. Gathering 20,000 people in a short time might be difficult, but 200 people are just a drop in the bucket. So Hera Bergen said, I will hand over the list to you as soon as possible, and the relevant personnel will report to you within 3 days. I just don't know if you can give me a specific address. Upon hearing this, Roland readily provided a few addresses and continued, Theoretically, you are the sun god's person, and supporting the cause of reform is a matter of course, so I shouldn't be the one to pay you. However, considering that the sun god is currently penniless and is working for me, and the assistants you provide are indeed working for me, do you want anything? Mr. Hera Bergen. Roland was not a stingy person. For Hera Bergen, who provided him with 20,000 tool people, he didn't mind giving appropriate compensation. After all, once these 20,000 people arrive, it's unknown if they will ever go back. Roland still had some conscience, and if he didn't give this compensation, he would be implicitly owing the other party a favor, and favors are harder to repay than anything else. As for why Roland didn't have this attitude towards Osius, even though he also sent many people to join the cause of reform, the reason is simple. In Roland's eyes, the people of the Eternal Blaze Church were, to put it bluntly, a bunch of fanatics and thugs. And thugs are something Roland has no shortage of. He uses them when needed but won't force them to stay afterward. But intellectuals are something Roland is truly lacking. Not to mention the assistants, the border city is desperately short of teachers, a group of illiterates are crying out for knowledge. After all, in this era, although various churches have introduced some schools with the prototype of compulsory education, generally speaking, most poor people still cannot afford to go to school. It's already good if they are literate. If it were a prosperous metropolis like Backland, there might be more intellectuals, but in the border city, university graduates are absolute rarities. Middle school graduates are already considered strong, and even those with primary school education can be called very cultured. And this is not an isolated case, but the situation in most cities in ruin. In this situation, let alone 20,000 intellectuals, Roland wouldn't think 200,000 was too many, because when building the new world in the future, no amount of talent will be enough. How can I ask you for compensation? Hera Bergen instinctively declined, but halfway through, he stopped because he saw Roland's attitude. Roland didn't want to owe favors, he wanted to settle this matter directly. So Hera Bergen paused for a moment before saying, "But since you are so insistent, allow me to boldly make some requests." "Speak," Roland said, very satisfied with his understanding. "I hear you have extensive research in the domains of the Old Ones and the Outer Gods. I wonder if I could have the honor of obtaining this knowledge." When Hera Bergen said this, his eyes held genuine anticipation. If the Black Evernight goddess wanted this knowledge out of the mentality of, knowing oneself and the enemy leads to victory in every battle, Hera Bergen's desire was more for knowledge itself. It can be said that knowledge is like honey to Hera Bergen. Others might turn pale at the mention of it, but Hera Bergen greatly enjoys immersing himself in the ocean of knowledge. And knowledge related to the Old Ones and the Outer Gods has always been something he wanted to explore but couldn't obtain much of due to limited conditions. This was naturally a regret for Hera Bergen, and now that this regret could finally be compensated, Hera Bergen spoke without hesitation. "Did you discuss this with Black Knight?" Roland asked with a smile, also knowing that Hera Bergen was probably just purely eager for knowledge. So he nodded and said, "No problem. I will write down the relevant knowledge for you. In the future, if I make any new progress in my research on the Outer Gods, I will also share it with you. Thank you immensely for your generosity." Hera Bergen was clearly very satisfied with this outcome. As for whether the people he sent to support Roland could return, Hera Bergen actually didn't care. He trusted the Sun God's character, so he believed that Roland's place wouldn't be a bad destination. In fact, considering the other party's special nature, for his believers, working for Roland might even be a good thing. And for Hera Bergen himself, the people in the church, besides maintaining order and providing faith, weren't of much other use. Many church members, not being beyonders, couldn't participate in the field of mysticism. Their usual knowledge didn't have much opportunity to be used, and they could only indulge in doing problems and taking exams all day. For these people, Hera Bergen felt that instead of letting them continue to rot in the examination hall, it would be better to let them work for Roland, where they could at least realize some life value and contribute to society. Thus, a transaction that satisfied both parties was reached. Chapter 380, Who Can Refuse a Sun God? The members of the Knowledge Church naturally had no idea what kind of overtime hell awaited them in the future. If they knew, perhaps they would have stayed up all night doing a few test papers to calm their nerves. As for their cold lord, the god of knowledge and wisdom Hera Bergen, after reaching a deal with Roland, it immediately received a portion of the reward on the spot. Roland was truly a straightforward person. Adhering to the principle as since I'm already here, he immediately used extraordinary means to engrave all his research on the Outer Gods up to that point onto paper and handed it to Hera Bergen, also asking it to take a copy to the Evernight goddess. After all, it was quite troublesome for Roland to come to the Star Realm. Making another trip just for this matter wasn't very necessary. Hera Bogan naturally wouldn't refuse. It put away the materials belonging to the Evernight goddess, and its gaze involuntarily fell upon the materials belonging to itself. It was clearly impatient to read them, but due to the guest still being present, it restrained itself. Roland naturally saw this. He smiled and didn't intend to delay Hera Bogan from swimming in the ocean of knowledge. He just turned his head to look at the sun god and asked, "Do you have anything else you want to talk about with Hera Bogan? If not, I'll go deal with the aftermath of the Rose School of Thought first, and then go take a look at the Forsaken Land of the Gods. Of course, none of these matters are very urgent, so if you need anything, we can talk slowly." Although there were still many things to deal with afterwards, most of them were already being handled by someone, so they wouldn't get out of control. It wouldn't make much difference whether Roland went a bit earlier or a bit later, so he wasn't in a hurry. The sun god looked at Hera Bogan upon hearing this, and the latter also raised its eyes to look at him at this moment. The two looked at each other for a few seconds, and then the sun god smiled and said, "Although I really want to catch up with you in detail, I think you, Hera Bogan, probably need undisturbed reading time more right now, and I also need to deal with some other matters, so." The sun god paused here, and showed a gentle smile towards Hera Bogan, saying, "See you next time, Hera Bogan. If you don't mind then, perhaps we can talk about the changes in knowledge in the field of mysticism over the past few thousand years. As you know, I belong to the past after all, and I'm not very familiar with this part. See you next time, Lord." Hera Bogan also smiled, the smile relaxed yet slightly embarrassed. It continued, "I also look forward to discussing this topic with you. I will prepare afternoon tea in advance to welcome your arrival then, but..." Hera Bogan also paused here, its expression becoming much more serious, and it said earnestly, "In some aspects, I am actually a rather stubborn old man. I hope you won't find me too serious then." The sun god looked at Hera Bogan with a slight surprise upon hearing this, and then he smiled and said just as seriously, "I don't think being serious and earnest is a flaw when discussing knowledge." After the sun god and Hera Bogan said goodbye to each other, Roland naturally left with the sun god. And after the two left, Hera Bogan didn't rush to look at the materials in its hand, but instead looked in the direction they left, and then showed a relaxed and relieved smile. Perhaps this can also be considered a good start. Hera Bogan didn't know. Roland's appearance and the sun god's return shattered too many plans the god of knowledge and wisdom had previously made, and also caused unprecedented huge changes in the situation of this world. Hera Bogan actually didn't know whether this was good or bad, but at least for now, it didn't dislike this change. After leaving the star realm, Roland looked at the sun god with slight doubt and asked, "Do you have something you need to deal with? Do you need me to take you there?" Although he knew this was likely just a polite excuse, Roland couldn't rule out the possibility that the sun god really had something to deal with, so he simply asked directly. The sun god looked at him upon hearing this, and said with a slight chuckle, "Yes, there is something. After all, Saussure still has to handle the follow-up matters for the Rose School of Thought for you, I can't possibly delay his work." Roland raised his eyebrows and suddenly said, "Actually, if you want to take over his work, that's also fine." The sun god looked at him, shook his head, and said helplessly, "Poaching someone from under me, isn't that inappropriate?" "What's inappropriate about it? You should know I'm very accommodating. If you, Grisha, are willing, I don't mind at all if you bring your whole family to join me." Roland smiled brightly, saying this with complete sincerity. After all, who could refuse a sun god joining them? Especially when the other party even comes with tool people A, B, and C. "I mind, thank you." The sun god refused with difficulty. He then showed Roland a gentle smile, but his voice was very serious and firm. "I have already entrusted the matter of restraining you to Saussure. Therefore, please allow me to always stand opposite you and be the one who is vigilant of you and prevents you from crossing the line." That's a gentle yet cruel answer, full of the sun god's style. Roland raised his eyebrows, not disappointed. He then changed the topic and asked with great interest, "Actually, there's a question I've been curious about for a long time." "What question?" The sun god had long been accustomed to Roland's erratic nature and naturally followed his topic, asking, During this time, I have also witnessed your relationships with various king of angels. I must say your relationships are really good. So I'm very curious, among your 8 great king of angels, who do you like the most? Roland asked with a serious expression, while secretly opening a recording device from the extraordinary field. Although this world didn't have cameras yet, extraordinary power existed after all, so there were ways to temporarily record some scenes. The sun god naturally saw Roland's little action, or rather, Roland had no intention of hiding it at all. The other party's attitude of enjoying the spectacle and not minding making things bigger gave the sun god a headache. He rarely hesitated before saying, "I'm afraid I can't give you an answer to this question. They are all very important to me." Clearly, even the sun god could only choose to evade such a question that could easily cause a family war if handled improperly. But there must be the most important one, right? But Roland clearly wouldn't let him off easily and continued, "If you don't answer, why don't I take a guess?" He showed a thoughtful expression, and then suddenly realized, "I guess it's Osius, after all, he is your eldest son, and people always have unique feelings for their first child." The sun god was choked for a moment, because he knew Roland's words were not a trap. No matter whether he went along with the other party's words, admitted it, or denied it, it wouldn't be a good answer. But he couldn't really not answer, because not answering would definitely be twisted into an admission by default. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. Chapter 381, Being Little Red's Old Father. The sun god could only close his eyes after a few seconds of silence, then smiled and said, "Why can't it be Saucerier? After all, in this world, there's probably no one who wouldn't love another version of themselves." The sun god chose the safest answer, pushing his vice king out to take the blame. Tisk. A cunning savior, Roland tsked in dissatisfaction. The sun god spoke before Roland could ask the next question. He smiled and said, "Is your spirituality still alright? Perhaps it's time for Saucerier to take over. You need him more than I do right now." A family war was perfectly avoided by the sun god. Not. After all, once certain questions are asked, no matter what the answer is, they are destined to cause a bit of a stir. Especially when the person asking the question was Roland, that guy who loves to watch drama unfold. "So you just came to complain to me that the sun god avoided your trap question?" Medici glanced up at Roland opposite him, who was cracking sunflower seeds, and said irritably, "If you have nothing to do, go handle a couple pounds of documents. Do you know what a mess the Rose School of Thought is? The Rose School of Thought is different from the Numinous Episcopate. Because it is backed by the Mother Tree and the Mother Goddess, although the Rose School of Thought has been suppressed by the 7 gods, its various tentacles operating in secret cover an astonishing range. For Roland's group, who have taken down the Rose School of Thought at this moment, this is both a good thing and a bad thing. The good thing is that they can not only cut off these tentacles but also follow the vine to find more forces and hidden minions belonging to the outer gods. The bad thing is that this will be an astonishing amount of work, especially now that they have already alerted the enemy. To catch these dogs of the outer gods by following the vine will require more effort. And this part of the work was naturally handed over to Medici. After all, he is a schemer, so it's right up his alley. When Roland came running over to complain to him, Medici was looking at the contact list obtained from interrogating Rose School of Thought members. So it's no wonder Medici was irritable. Anyone facing this mountain of work that keeps growing wouldn't have a very good attitude towards their boss. "Don't be so irritable, Little Red. I've already gotten you an assistant. They'll be able to start in 3 days, and then you'll be relaxed," Roland said with a smile, continuing to crack sunflower seeds. He then looked meaningfully at the crumpled list in Medici's hand and added, "And you care quite a bit, don't you?" Medici's movements stiffened upon hearing this. Roland continued leisurely, "But it's a pity, I think the sun god's favorite is either Amon or Osius. It probably has nothing to do with you." Swish. The list in Medici's hand was completely crumpled into a ball. He glanced at Roland, squeezing out a sentence almost through gritted teeth, "Do you have to sow discord here?" "It's not sowing discord, just stating facts," Roland retorted, then said without reservation, "After all, he is someone who will always stand against me. Isn't it normal for me to give him some trouble to prevent you from defecting in the future? Roland smiled when he said this, his smile bright and filled with amusement as he said, we were originally in a relationship of mutual need and mutual vigilance. Roland truly never minded the sun god's wary attitude towards him, it was natural in his view. Similarly, Roland has never hidden his wariness towards the sun god from beginning to end. He has been prepared to be hostile towards the sun god in the future from the very beginning. Of course, not just the sun god. For example, no one would think that Roland is so actively dealing with the outer god's pollution for Rosal and the others, and suppressing God's will for Osius, out of kindness, right? You know, Roland can also control people who have Nyarlathotep's pollution in their bodies. Of course, Roland wouldn't do this unless necessary. He doesn't like puppets who have lost themselves. So this is just a safeguard, and of course, also a form of help. Quote. You are truly twistedly frank, Medici glanced at Roland and commented. Thank you for the compliment, frankness is one of my greatest strengths. Roland smiled confidently, then looked at Medici and asked doubtfully, and I'm really curious about the answer to this question. Aren't you curious, little red? Medici's body stiffened again, because he couldn't refute this question. As the sun god's former red angel, Medici was naturally also curious about which angel the sun god liked the most. So you see, curiosity is completely human nature. Roland spread his hands, then reached out and patted Medici's shoulder, saying comfortingly. It's okay, little red. Although you're not the sun god's favorite angel, you are definitely my favorite tool. You can totally treat me like a father, just like you treat the sun god. I don't mind. His tone was sincere and genuine. Medici. The great red angel laughed at this moment, a laugh born of anger. He then grabbed Roland's arm and said with a fake smile, since you're so good at tearing people down, stay and help me review the list. I assume, as a father, you wouldn't be unwilling to fulfill a child's small wish. This time, Roland's smile froze. He looked at Medici, trying hard to pull his arm back, but it didn't budge. Finally, he took a deep breath and said with a smile, of course. After all, I'm your dearest dad. Things had come to this point, there was no way to run. So naturally, he had to get as many benefits as possible. After all, slacking off is common, but being Medici's old father isn't. Medici, who had originally just said that deliberately because he was fuming, felt his mouth twitch after hearing Roland's words and suddenly regretted it a little. Unfortunately, words spoken cannot be taken back. While one Roland was grabbed by Medici for overtime, on the other side, another Roland had already arrived in the forsaken land of the gods. That's right, the Roland grabbed by Medici was actually just his incarnation. Roland's main body was heading towards the forsaken land of the gods from the start. After all, Roland also wanted to know the latest progress from the biological laboratory. And when Roland arrived at the biological laboratory, he saw Frank's eyes shining as he was learning about the situation from Bethel. Quote. So you mean, this experimental sample is not only an angel from the aberrant pathway, but also related to the evil god mother tree, and contains the power of reproduction. Frank had clearly learned some basic information from Bethel. He was incredibly excited as he said this, and after asking, he kept muttering. Amazing. This is amazing. I've never seen such an existence. Oh, I have a great idea right now. Bethel's expression was a bit subtle. Clearly, he hadn't had much contact with Frank the mad scientist before today. Chatting. Roland raised an eyebrow and greeted them. Chapter 382, The Terrifying Strength of the Mushroom King. His Highness Lucifer. Frank looked towards Roland, his eyes shining as he asked, His Highness Bethel told me that you are preparing to use God's spawn Saya as a research subject for the biological laboratory, is that true? I do have this intention. Roland nodded without reservation, looking at Frank and saying, Bethel should have already introduced you to the situation regarding God's spawn Saya. It is a very dangerous entity. Although I will place sufficient restrictions on it, its very existence is enough to cause you harm. Therefore, at this stage, I will not allow you to directly research it. I will only provide some samples of it for you to study. Although he had sufficient confidence in the Mushroom King, Frank was not even a demigod at this stage after all, so Roland still chose to act cautiously. Hearing this, Frank first showed a slightly regretful expression, then nodded and said, "That's how it should be. Angels are indeed too powerful for me. For an existence of this level, just a little flesh and blood is enough for me to study for a long time. I look forward to you researching something from it. If you can advance to a sufficient level later, I can also allow you to directly research it itself." Roland smiled as he looked at Frank and said, "During the following period, I will also stay here for research. If I determine it is sufficiently safe, I can allow you to observe." Roland's previous statement about researching the power of outer gods was not just casual talk, he genuinely intended to do so. When Frank heard this, his expression looked so excited he was about to faint. He truly was a very pure researcher. It could be said that for Frank, God Sponsaea itself held sufficient research value. Roland was not surprised by this. He then continued to chat with Frank about the research during this period. The current research of the biological laboratory is mainly in two areas. One is solving the issue of food production, and the other is researching the mysteries of biology itself, attempting to develop genetic ascension skills. Currently, due to the lack of sufficient experimental materials, there hasn't been enough progress in the first area. However, the arrival of God Sponsaea this time might bring about some turning points. As for the second area, it's hard to say whether there has been any progress. At least Roland fell silent after following Frank to see the results of his research during this period. Although it hadn't been long since the biological laboratory was established, due to the excessively abundant monster materials in the forsaken land of the gods, Frank had come up with many strange ideas during this time, thus creating a large number of bizarre creations. For example, fish with wings, the kind covered all over with over a dozen pairs of wings. Honestly, it looked very sanity-draining. Another example was a rose with hundreds of eyes, a poisonous snake with 8 heads that cried like a baby, purple cabbage that chased people to bite their bottoms, and so on. They weren't exactly created by me, I just performed some surgical grafting using the inherent characteristics of the monsters. Frank introduced, not meaning to show off his achievements at all, just saying with some excitement. Because they are monsters, their vitality is much more tenacious than ordinary creatures, which made many of my experiments much simpler. My current idea is, if different monsters are grafted together, will their abilities fuse? Theoretically, it should be possible, as monsters themselves are not lacking in composite abilities. Very creative. For a moment, Roland didn't know what to say and could only offer this single compliment. This was also true, the things Frank had created were truly full of creativity, possessing a kind of Cthulhu-esque beauty. Bethel, who had also toured these strange creations, looked at Frank with a hesitant expression, wanting to speak but stopping, then wanting to speak again. Bethel had once not understood why Roland's attitude towards Frank was so strange. Now, he felt he understood. This might be a terrifying existence, not terrifying in terms of strength, but terrifying in another sense. After receiving the compliment, Frank's mood clearly improved. He continued to introduce his various ideas to Roland and Bethel. Besides the grafting method, he had many other strange ideas, some of which could only be described as making Roland gasp. Actually, I originally wanted to research vengeful spirits and evil spirits. I was very curious about why they can survive without a physical body. If I could unlock the secret, could humans also abandon their bodies in the future and live longer? Frank showed an embarrassed smile at this point, which even made him appear somewhat simple. But I feel that wouldn't be very worthwhile. The human body itself is a huge treasure. Abandoning the physical body just to live a bit longer isn't very cost-effective. It would be better to research how to combine the human body with plants, as many plants have longer lifespans than humans. You are doing very well. Roland looked at Frank, who had a simple smile, a bit of dirt on his body, and looked like an old farmer, nodded, and then said, current research should still focus on the human body itself. The soul can be researched, but it's best to make it a topic for later. The two chatted for a few more sentences. Roland then took a small sample from God Sponsaea and let the already impatient Frank go off to research it himself. After Frank left, Bethel watched his receding figure disappear from sight before saying, "Are you really sure it's reliable to entrust the future of humanity to him?" "I'm not sure, but this world itself is a crazy one, so it naturally can accommodate a crazy human." Roland smiled towards Bethel and said, only with such craziness is it possible for humanity to forge a new path in the future. Bethel pursed his lips upon hearing this, not refuting, but just sighing and saying, perhaps you are right. Of course, if this world one day welcomes the World Mushroom Day. Roland continued as if catching his breath, then perhaps it wouldn't be bad for everyone to become mushroom people together. Various strange mushrooms he had just seen in the biological laboratory appeared in Bethel's mind. After 3 seconds of silence, he tactfully said, in that case, I might choose to die as a human. I didn't expect you kid to be a fundamentalist. Roland glanced at Bethel, then suddenly said, but you aren't human right now either. To be honest, aren't star worms more bizarre than mushroom people? Bethel choked slightly. Even he had to admit that the form of a star worm was indeed no better than a mushroom person. In reality, most mythological creatures in this world are quite bizarre. So, facts have proven that being bizarre is the underlying logic of this world. Roland spread his hands and said, since that's the case, don't dislike the mushroom people. As long as consciousness can be preserved, it doesn't matter. Chapter 383, Scriptwriter Potion Digested. Bethel pursed his lips, thinking Roland's words made a lot of sense at this moment. By the way, where is Will? Why haven't I seen him? Roland suddenly remembered a certain snake of fate who should have been in the biological laboratory but was nowhere to be seen, and couldn't help but show a suspicious expression. Bethel, who obviously knew something, coughed and said, Will is with Ouroboros. I looked for him when I first arrived here. Ah. Roland was genuinely surprised this time. He looked at Bethel in astonishment and asked doubtfully, when did their relationship get so good? I remember when I told Will about relocating the biological laboratory to the forsaken land of the gods, he was very resistant. It took me a lot of effort to persuade him. Bethel also looked at him, with a subtle expression, and said tactfully, is there a possibility that it's because this laboratory is too weird, and Will doesn't want to stay? Bethel had naturally also wondered why Will was hanging out with Ouroboros, and when he asked, he only received a look of utter despair from Will in a sentence. Go take a look around that laboratory yourself, and you'll find that staying with your enemy is also a wonderful thing. At least the stupid snake looks good, not strange at all. Bethel didn't quite understand these words at first, until he just took a stroll around the biological laboratory under Frank's guidance and finally understood Will's meaning. To be fair, Frank's biological laboratory's monsters weren't actually dangerous, at least they were just minor trash to an angel, but the mental damage they inflicted was real. Just looking at them made people feel like their sanity was dropping. No normal person would want to stay here. Hearing Bethel's words, Roland couldn't help but fall silent as well. After all, he was also someone who valued appearance. Although he supported Mushroom King's experiments, he truly didn't want to look at those creations a second time. So in the end, Roland just said, all right, I can understand. As long as he can arrive in time if something happens, that's fine. He left a clone behind. It's usually dormant, but it will activate at critical moments, Bethel said. That works then, Roland nodded. Then, thinking of something else, he looked at Bethel and said, so, are you leaving first? I'll probably need to stay here for a few more days to do some research. Bethel clearly hesitated for a few seconds before finally nodding and saying, I'll stay. Your recovered strength is limited after all, someone needs to be here to prevent accidents. Thus, Roland became busy. Apart from Jack's daily life, which was relatively leisurely, Lucifer and the main body were also occupied. One accompanied Medici everywhere to clear out the outer god's minions, while the other stayed in the biological laboratory to research the mother tree's power through god Sponsea. While Roland was rarely busy, Renette Tinacle and Saucereer were also working overtime. Because God of the Bound Toltsena was not in good condition and needed rest, most of the Rose School of Thought's affairs were handed over by Roland to Renette Tinacle, the leader of the Temperance faction, while Saucereer mainly assisted from the side. It must be said, Coconut Tree Miss was still very reliable. Although her current state wasn't as good as before, she was still very skilled at handling various matters. Coupled with Saucereer's assistance from the side, after spending some time, the two of them could be said to have sorted out the Rose School of Thought's mess very smoothly. The assets that needed to be inventoried were inventoried, the members who needed to be reformed were sent for reform, and the unsalvageable ones were simply imprisoned, waiting to be used as disposable items later. All the Rose School of Thought's affiliated organizations were also dealt with, either fully incorporated or directly disbanded. In addition, there were many miscellaneous matters, all handled by the two of them, truly gaining complete control over the organization from top to bottom. Of course, this didn't mean the work was over, on the contrary, it was just the beginning. After all, in the subsequent arrangements for the South Continent, the Rose School of Thought had to play a huge role. That was a place that truly required constant attention. However, this part of the work couldn't be completed in a short time, so having Renette Tinacle temporarily in charge was enough. Furthermore, God of the Bound Toltsana, after a period of rest, was finally able to return to work, so Saussure naturally bid farewell to Renette Tinacle and returned to his original post. He also had work of his own to handle. Among other things, Saussure was about to take over matters concerning the border city. During this time, the assistance Roland had acquired from Hera Bergen naturally came online. It must be said that the old dragon was an honest person. The 200 assistants sent over were all talented, which greatly alleviated Roland's shortage of tool people, allowing Medici and others to finally escape the overtime hell somewhat. After the Rose School of Thought's affairs largely came to an end, Roland was also liberated. Lucifer's alias finally didn't have to work overtime anymore and took the time to go to the border city. There was no particular reason. Firstly, the 2 trial rules for the border city had finally taken effect, and Roland planned to go check the situation. Secondly, Little K had finally finished digesting the faceless potion and was now waiting to take leave to advance to Marionettist, so Roland needed to approve the leave. In addition, Saussure was also about to officially take over a series of tasks in the border city, and Roland needed to go witness it. After Roland arrived at the border city, he found that compared to his last visit, the city seemed much livelier at the moment. More accurately, the population had increased, but the atmosphere was as always, full of vitality and enthusiasm. Roland walked alone in the border city, observing carefully along the way, which also allowed him to discover some subtle differences. For example, during his last visit, although most people were filled with yearning for the future because Medici had already taken control of the border city and reformed it, there were still many people with worried eyes, clearly not optimistic about the future. But this time, as Roland observed along the way, he found that everyone's confidence seemed to have increased significantly. Roland raised his eyebrows and randomly found some people to ask for the reason. As expected, he discovered that it was indeed related to the trial rules of the border city. Many people regarded them as miracles, believing that they had divine support behind them. In this world where believing in deities was the mainstream, this naturally brought immense confidence to many people. This was also the reason why the city's population had increased. After the miracles appeared, many people brought their relatives and friends over. It must be said, this was a pleasant surprise, but upon closer thought, it wasn't particularly unexpected. Roland had no intention of correcting this point. It wasn't a bad thing for the residents to regard the existence of the rules as miracles. After all, there really were gods in this world, and many members on their side needed faith as an anchor to resist madness. Moreover, the explanation of miracles would facilitate the implementation of more rules later on. Therefore, Roland was very satisfied with what he had seen and heard. What made him even more satisfied was that after successively saving Mr. Dor, Torzen, and others during this period, his scriptwriter potion had already been more than half digested. After witnessing the changes in the border city caused by the rules, Roland's scriptwriter potion was completely digested. Chapter 384 Little K is about to go to the 5 Cs. As expected, compared to directly changing others' fates, the focus of the scriptwriter potion is instead on establishing rules to restrain others. Incorporating others into my rules and making them live by my rules is a script more in line with the chaos pathway. Roland pinched his chin in thought and didn't dwell on this matter too much. After all, he had already suspected this point, and now it can only be said to be completely confirmed. Roland quickly shifted his focus to another matter. Preparing the Joy Believer potion, and the matter of the advancement ritual. Due to the busy period, Roland hadn't had time to collect the last auxiliary material, but this shouldn't be too difficult. Going to find Palace Sorcerer, or simply going to find Zeratul and letting him experience what despair is, would solve it. Roland was more concerned about the matter of the advancement ritual. He found that his advancement ritual seemed to have been completed. It's not because of City of Silver, but because of the Rose School of Thought. Roland's expression became a little strange. The Rose School of Thought didn't have many core members, but it had many informants and affiliated organizations. The most crucial thing is that he wiped out the Rose School of Thought, which directly affected the fates of more than 10,000 people. This is not strange. After all, the Rose School of Thought was one of the Outer God's biggest pawns in this world. From this perspective, this matter affected the fates of far more than 10,000 people. Moreover, unlike the little-known City of Silver incident, with Roland's intentional promotion, basically everyone involved in the Beander domain knows that the Rose School of Thought has changed hands and that the Temperance faction, which was defeated in the past struggles, has killed their way back. This surely exceeds 100,000 people. As for making at least 1,000 people develop profound feelings for Roland, the Rose School of Thought has more than 1,000 people, and now, the feelings of everyone in the Rose School of Thought towards Roland are undeniably profound. It is precisely because of this that Roland's advancement ritual was directly completed. So I can advance to sequence 4 soon. That's quite fast. Roland was a little happy, but thinking carefully about what he had done during this period, it's not strange. Rather, he has caused so much trouble. If the potion still couldn't be digested, that would be outrageous. It's decided. After approving Little K's leave, I'll go find Pales and strive to advance to Joy Believer today. Roland made a decision in his heart and wasn't planning to continue wandering around the border city. Instead, he went directly towards Little K's office. When Roland arrived at Little K's office, there were already other people in the office. It was precisely Saucerer, who had received Roland's message and came to hand over work with Little K. Good morning, Saucerer. Roland smiled and greeted Saucerer. He then examined the former Heavenly Kingdom Vice Monarch for a few seconds and said with a smile, "You look much more energetic than before. It seems you've rested quite well during this time." Previously, Saucerer always looked like he was on the verge of sudden death, which made Roland, this capitalist, feel a little pain in his conscience, but now he looks much better. Good morning, Lucifer. Saucerer showed a gentle smile and said after greeting, "I have indeed rested quite well during this time, it's just a bit too leisurely, which I'm not quite used to." This was the truth. After Saucerer finished dealing with the Rose School of Thought's affairs, he originally wanted to take over the work of the border city in all aspects immediately. After all, the matters on City of Silver's side were almost dealt with. But Roland stopped him, saying that there was no hurry. He wasn't crazy enough to let Saucerer deal with the Rose School of Thought's affairs one moment and then make him work overtime to take over the border city's matters the next. He forcibly arranged a few days of vacation for Saucerer, mainly because Roland was genuinely afraid that Saucerer would die suddenly. Of course, although it was called a vacation, Saucerer was actually still handling work, but the intensity was insignificant compared to before. Plus with the help of assistants, so overall for Saucerer, it was indeed a very leisurely period of time. Tisk, the way you say that, it's like a born 007 saint body. Roland shook his head, then said in a joking tone, "But don't worry, your leisurely good days are about to end. What's coming next is a year-round overtime hell." That sounds really terrible, Saucerer also said in a joking tone, then he shrugged his shoulders and said, "But I seem to be used to it. Overtime hell or whatever, is that a big deal for the Heavenly Kingdom Vice Monarch? That's routine. Do you understand the value of, Saucerer is working overtime? What a great hell, Saucerer, you saying that will make me look like an unscrupulous capitalist." Roland complained, then looked at Little K and Xiao Amon, who were muttering in the corner with, Jack. As, Jack, himself, Roland naturally knew that these 3 little ones were complaining about the overtime hell. He smiled at them, and amidst Little K's and Xiao Amon's suddenly stiff expressions, he said, "Ah, I almost forgot about you 3. Good morning, Little K, Xiao Amon, Jack. Good morning, Mr. Lucifer." This was the honest Little K. "Good morning, Uncle Lucifer. Am I the only one who wants to complain that it's actually almost noon?" Xiao Amon didn't know where he pulled out a pocket watch and pointed to the hands close to 11 o'clock on it. "Bad morning, old guy." "Jack," showed a sunny and cheerful big boy's smile and said to Lucifer, "Have you finally remembered to approve our leave? Do you need a vacation?" Roland gave Jack a dramatic glance and said, "As far as I know, you were basically slacking off during that time and didn't do anything serious." "Who says that? I helped little K a lot during this time, alright," Jack retorted and said self-righteously, "You can't accuse me of not working just because I didn't work 007, you unscrupulous capitalist." Emphasizing, respecting the teacher and valuing the Tao. When Lucifer heard this, he didn't show any angry expression. He just glanced at little K and Xiao Amon beside Jack, his eyes clearly conveying a message: "My little cabbage has indeed been led astray by you guys." Little K. Xiao Amon. "Honestly, hasn't Jack always been like this? Mr. Lucifer, your filter is too strong." "Never mind, I knew this would happen." Roland shook his head, then looked at little K and said, "I approve your request for leave to go to the 5 Seas to find a mermaid and advance to marionettist. Saucereer will complete the work handover with you. After the handover is complete, you can act freely. Also," Roland paused here. A stack of documents appeared in his hand. He handed the documents to little K and said amidst the latter's confused gaze, "You don't need to rush back from this trip to the 5 Seas. It just so happens that I have some 5 Seas related work for you. Of course, you won't be doing it for nothing, I will give you a satisfactory reward." Little K took the documents Roland handed over and quickly looked through them, finding that they contained information on various forces in the 5 Seas, such as the Church of the Sea God Resistance, such as the various pirate generals, etc. Chapter 385, Pirate General Sharon. The forces in the 5 Seas are chaotic. Generally speaking, various powers have a hand in it, with the Storm Church being the strongest. This is due to the home field advantage brought by extraordinary abilities, but even the Storm Church cannot truly conquer the ocean, so other powers still occupy important corners of the 5 Seas. By the way, although the numinous episcopate was taken down by Roland, the Admiral of Hell did not lose his job because of this. After being taken back and undergoing some modifications, Ludwell returned to work. However, his current duty has changed from sending people to hell to being a maritime firefighter, busy every day saving unlucky souls who encounter pirates, shipwrecks, and a series of other accidents at sea. As for Admiral of Blood Seigneur, also one of the 7 great pirate generals, he has said goodbye to the ocean forever. After Roland took down the Rose School of Thought, he became a consumable item locked in a prison, to be used as a one-time tool in the future anyway. The reason for this difference is mainly that although both of them can be described as killing like flies, Admiral of Hell Ludwell is not actually bloodthirsty. He is simply fulfilling the teachings of death, treating the act of sending people to hell as a job. Therefore, after the head of the numinous episcopate changed and the new death, established new teachings, Admiral of Hell Ludwell accepted the new teachings without any resistance, transforming from a killer into a savior. In Roland's eyes, he was the type who, although he had made mistakes, was still salvageable. For people like this, Roland has always been willing to give him a chance. Admiral of Blood Seigneur is different, he is truly perverted from the inside out. He kills simply because he enjoys it, belonging to the unsalvageable type. For people like this, Roland has always been happy to let them serve their final purpose and then die. However, although they lost an Admiral of Blood Seigneur, Roland still arranged for a new pirate general to take the position. After all, the 5 Seas are also very important, and there is no need to give up the share that originally belonged to the Rose School of Thought. So, after looking through the information on the pirate generals for a while, little K showed a surprised expression, raised his head, and looked at Roland, asking, "Is Miss Sharon the new pirate general?" Roland nodded and explained, "The other Sequence 5s of the Rose School of Thought are either unsalvageable or still undergoing modifications." So, Renette Tinacle decided to let Sharon fill in first. After the other Sequence 5s are done with modifications, if she doesn't want to continue, then someone else will take over. "I understand." Little K's expression was still subtle. He knew about the Rose School of Thought being taken down by Mr. Lucifer. Although he wasn't clear about the deeper details, Lucifer himself hadn't hidden this matter from him. Little K also knew what kind of character the former Admiral of Blood Seigneur was, so he could probably understand why Lucifer would arrange for a newcomer to replace him. But Miss Sharon, Little K recalled all his past interactions with Sharon and truly couldn't imagine how Miss Sharon could be a pirate general. That would be too strange. Of course, Roland understood what was behind Little K's subtle expression. In fact, when he learned that Renette was letting Sharon replace Admiral of Blood Seigneur to become the new pirate general, he also felt it was strange. But seriously, wouldn't this mean The Great Detective and Miss Puppet would have a sequel? Will the Great Detective meet the Puppet Pirate General after changing careers to become a bounty hunter? Thinking this way, Roland not only didn't find it strange but even felt a bit of anticipation. It's time to let Furs write a new book. Hopefully, she still has time. After Roland's thoughts drifted for a few seconds, he finally pulled them back. He then looked at Little K and said, "You have quite a few tasks. The first task is to investigate Bansi Harbor. You don't need to do the specific investigation work, you just need to stroll around there, and Jack will complete the other tasks." Bansi Harbor. Little K showed a confused expression, not understanding what was going on behind the scenes. He couldn't help but glance at his companion next to him. "Got it, old guy, I'll complete the exploration work." Jack made an okay gesture. He definitely had to go to Bansi Harbor. That place is related to the City of Disaster, and the City of Disaster is closely linked to the original creator's resurrection contingency plan. Both logically and emotionally, he had to take a look. As for why he absolutely had to bring Little K along, it was mainly to utilize Little K's trouble-attracting constitution. After all, Roland wasn't really sure if he himself could trigger special circumstances by going there, but bringing Little K would greatly increase the probability of special circumstances occurring. Don't look at Jack. Bansi Harbor has a certain connection with the original creator. To be precise, the original creator's contingency plan is related to that place, which is why I'm having you investigate the situation. Roland, who approved the Lucifer alias, glanced at Little K and explained. Although it's not good to tell Little K about the outer gods and the original substances, the existence of the original creator is not a secret. Hearing Roland's words, Little K was immediately startled. He looked at Lucifer and confirmed, "The original creator. Is it the creator I understand? Otherwise, it can't be Grisha." Roland glanced at him and asked with a smile. Little K couldn't help but take a deep breath, and then said somewhat confusedly, "Does the original creator also need to leave behind a resurrection contingency plan?" Of course it would also leave behind a resurrection contingency plan. After all, it also wants to live. Roland smiled, but there was no warmth in his smile. He said, "But the creator absolutely cannot be resurrected. His resurrection would only cause this world to be destroyed again." Hearing this, Little K's expression suddenly changed. He clearly thought of something, pursed his lips, and said, "Like before. The former Earth civilization, the era that belonged to Zhou Mingrui and other transmigrators, was destroyed precisely because of the awakening of the original creator. Perhaps worse than that." Roland did not deny it. "I understand, I will do this task well." Little K nodded solemnly, then asked with slight confusion, "But why is Jack going to investigate? His soul is of the same origin as mine, he can resist certain pollution, but you cannot." Roland explained simply. This wasn't a lie either. Roland was confident that even if he truly entered the City of Disaster, nothing would happen to him. Whether his physical body would be destroyed was hard to say, but his soul would definitely be fine. But Little K was different. Although having Saphira Castle gave him some resistance to the pollution of the City of Disaster, his soul was still that of an ordinary human after all, not as resilient as Roland. So, what Roland needed most was for Little K to act as an event trigger. The other dangerous things would naturally be done by him, who was more resistant. Of course, Roland didn't plan to just court death, he purely intended to just go and take a look. Little K then understood. He knew that Jack and Mr. Lucifer were both avatars of a certain great existence. In that regard, they were probably indeed more resilient than him. Chapter 386, Xiao Amon wants to become human. Your second mission is to take down the Sea God Church. You've seen the information on this organization. Although it's not a large organization, it has strategic significance. Taking it down and reforming it will be beneficial for the later 5C's liberation work. Roland continued, "After you obtain the characteristics of Kavatuva, I will arrange for someone to make them into a suitable magical item for you. This can be considered one of your rewards." Upon hearing this, little K's mind flashed with the information he had just seen about the Sea God Church. This is an indigenous faith sect in the 5 Seas. Its doctrines are very bloody and primitive, but its members are quite unusual, basically composed of the resistance forces in the 5 Seas who oppose colonization. If the 5 Seas are to be liberated in the future, taking down the Sea God Church is indeed somewhat necessary. Kavatuva is the god worshipped by the Sea God Church. He is, of course, not a true god but a Sequence 3 Sea King, and due to his madness, his strength is probably inferior to a true Sequence 3. Furthermore, his recent condition has been getting worse, and perhaps he is not far from falling. But even if Kavatuva is weak, he's still Sequence 3. Little K raised his doubts, pointing to himself and saying, "And I'm only Sequence 6. Him fighting Kavatuva. Is this real? I didn't expect you to really fight him. In fact, according to the original destiny, you just need to pick up the pieces." Roland smiled when he said this, and then continued. "Of course, although I believe in the convergence of destiny, we also need to consider the possibility of accidents. So at that time, you can contact the people of the Storm Church, and they will arrange for people to assist you." This was not a lie. Although Roland had not yet approached Old Pigeon from the Storm Church to talk, ever since he had greeted Sun God and Leodoro, the Storm Church had actually been turning a blind eye to their various actions. When the Night Church sent people to help, the Storm Church had actually also sent some people over. This is also the reason why Roland had not gone to find Leodoro. Although Old Pigeon is irritable, he is still very sensible. That's good. Little K breathed a sigh of relief. Although he was not afraid of strong enemies, fighting a Sequence 3 was still too much. Roland then explained some other tasks, and finally said, "Besides the Storm Church, you can also contact the forces of Admiral of Hell, Admiral of Temperance, Admiral of Stars, Vice Admiral Iceberg, and the Mysterious Queen. They are either our people or allies." Little K was a little speechless and couldn't help but complain, "It sounds like half of the 5 Seas are our people. Be confident, the remaining half of the 5 Seas will be ours sooner or later." Jack patted Little K's shoulder and said. Roland, who had approved the Lucifer alias, smiled and then looked at Little K and said, "You can first advance to Sequence 5, and then slowly complete these tasks, and by the way, digest the secret Puppet Master potion. The 5 Seas are more suitable for you to play the secret Puppet Master than here. I look forward to the day you advance to Sequence 4. I understand." Little K nodded. He had originally planned to quickly find the mermaid's whereabouts after arriving in the 5 Seas, advance, and then return, but since there are now many tasks, he doesn't need to rush back. Moreover, although the border city is good, it is indeed not conducive to digesting the secret Puppet Master potion. Roland then gave Little K a few more instructions, and then looked at Saucerier and said, "You can hand over the work." Little K also looked at Saucerier and said with a little embarrassment, "I've troubled you, Mr. Saucerier. This is what I should do. On the contrary, you have worked hard during this time." Saucerier smiled gently at Little K and said, "It's not hard work. I have also received sufficient rewards, and it is my honor to be able to do something for the cause of change." Little K shook his head. Although he had been very busy during this time, he didn't feel tired. On the one hand, he was very happy to do something for the ordinary people in this world, and on the other hand, he was not working for free during this time. He had both digested the Faceless Potion, prepared for the Miracle Invoker ritual, and received corresponding rewards, such as the materials related to the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion. From this point of view, Little K was actually a little embarrassed, always feeling that he had taken advantage. What are you embarrassed about? Others are not working for free either. For example, Medici's reward is a Sequence 1 characteristic and a ritual to become a god. Jack obviously saw what Little K was thinking and said with a smile. To be honest, although Roland made his employees work 007, he was never stingy with rewards. Whether it was saving people, characteristics, or other things, he basically saved what should be saved and gave what should be given. Jack is right, you don't have to feel embarrassed about this. Saucerier also said with a smile, and then he discussed work-related matters with Little K. Because Saucerier had helped handle many matters in the border city during this time, the handover of work between the two can be said to be very smooth. While the two were handing over work, Roland, who had approved the Lucifer alias, looked at Amon and said, "You are also going to the 5 Seas." "Can't I go to the 5 Seas, Uncle Lucifer?" Amon blinked and asked back. "Of course you can go. In this regard, you are free. I am just very curious. Little K is going to the 5 Seas to advance to Secret Puppet Master, Jack is going for fun, what about you? What are you going to the 5 Seas for?" Roland looked at Amon and asked with a smile. This Amon, who was raised by him to some extent, was silent for a second after hearing Roland's question, and then showed a serious expression and said, "I just want to go and see." Little K said that the 5 Seas is a very complex place, where there are all kinds of people, so I want to go and see. Amon looked up at Roland and said seriously, "During this time here, I have seen many beautiful aspects of human nature, and I have also somewhat understood why you, Uncle Lucifer, value human nature so much, but human nature is not only beautiful, is it?" Amon continued, "I know what I exist for, so I want to go and see the other side of human nature, even if it is ugly, I still want to see it, so that I can become a complete human." Amon does not have the memory of Amon's main body, but after Amon's main body descended on him last time, he did roughly understand the meaning of his existence, he exists to become a human. So during this time, Amon has been observing the various aspects of the border city, observing the beautiful and firm human nature, and he has indeed gained a lot from this observation. But this is not enough. Amon knows that human nature is not entirely composed of the beautiful side, so when Little K decided to take leave to go to the 5 Seas because of the advancement ritual, Amon also decided to go to the 5 Seas with Little K to witness the other side of human nature. Chapter 387, Leonard's life is meaningless. Roland wasn't too surprised by that answer, to be honest. He just stared at Amon, then sighed and said, "Although I think you might be self-taught in some things, and I'm a bit worried you might learn bad habits because of it, but..." He smiled, reached out and ruffled Amon's hair, saying, "Go on, Amon, go witness the other side of human nature. But don't forget, even in the mud, there's still beauty. More than experiencing those unpleasant things, I hope you can witness the beautiful flowers that still bloom in the chaos. Those flowers are more stunning than those in a greenhouse. I like them, and you probably will too." "I will," Amon nodded seriously. He would go witness those flowers, and he would become more like a person. After handling the leave requests for the 3 little ones and witnessing Saucereer take over the work in the border city, Roland's Lucifer persona didn't stay. Instead, he chose to visit Pales. At that time, Palace Sorcerer was pushing his student. That's right. Ever since Leonard unfortunately revealed the fact that he was a naive and sweet person in front of the angels of the Leziran Club several days ago, Pales's desire to push him had risen. He started giving Leonard extra lessons in various ways, making Leonard fall into the hell of extra lessons even earlier than the younger generation of the Abraham family. Perhaps this is a common problem among the Go3 family, they are all quite skilled at burying their descendants or students with test papers. In short, Leonard unfortunately lived this good life of handling Red Glove's work when there was something to do, and listening to Pales's extra lessons when there was nothing to do. Because of the characteristic of the Black Knight pathway requiring little sleep, Pales even saved on energy replenishing potions. Sometimes when Leonard was extremely sleepy, Pales could even give him extra lessons in his dreams. Perhaps it was also for this reason that Leonard's nightmare potion was digested incredibly fast. Who says falling into a nightmare isn't a form of reverse digestion? For example, a certain painful witch, to digest, in addition to bringing pain to others, her own pain can also digest the potion. Anyway, no matter what, Leonard's nightmare potion is now mostly digested, and he is on the verge of advancing to Sequence 6 Requiem Master as long as he accumulates enough merit. From this perspective, Pales's pushy approach was quite successful. In the original work, Leonard's advancement to Requiem Master was a matter for the following year. "Good afternoon, Pales, Leonard, did I interrupt you?" Roland, in his approved Lucifer persona, smiled and greeted Pales and Leonard. He glanced at Leonard, whose expression was one of despair, and then at the book filled with mystical knowledge in front of him. He raised an eyebrow and looked at Pales, saying, "Are you giving Leonard extra lessons?" Pales nodded and said, "You know this kid's mastery of mystical knowledge is really not great, so I've been giving him extra lessons during this time." But I'm not from the all-knower or seer pathway, there's no need to master a lot of this knowledge. Leonard finally couldn't help but mutter softly. He was really almost sick from studying during this time. You'll regret not studying when you need it. If you don't learn now, you'll know the pain when it's useful later, and that will come at a bloody price. Pales naturally heard Leonard's mumbling, glanced at him, and said with a chuckle. Don't I still have you, old man? Leonard clearly wanted to struggle a bit more. I can't stay with you forever, and you're not a child anymore. You should learn to live on your own, Pales said unmoved. Leonard was completely defeated and could only bury his head in the pile of study materials, radiating an aura of despair. You and Bethel probably have a lot in common, Roland said, shaking his head as he watched this scene. Bethel. Pales looked at Roland in confusion. He had been engrossed in pushing his student lately and wasn't very clear about some things. Bethel has returned and recently reorganized the Abraham family. His strategy for the younger generation of the Abraham family is similar to yours. Study as hard as you can as long as you don't die from it, Roland explained briefly, without revealing too much. Although his cooperation with Pales started early, their relationship had never been too close. After all, Pales was truly a very indecisive angel. Even when cooperating with Roland, he had never chosen to go all in, so he naturally couldn't enter Roland's core circle. However, Roland didn't care about this. He helped Pales partly to gain capital in the early stages, and partly because he now had the bloodline of the Zoroaster family, so he didn't mind helping Pales, the ancestor of the Zoroaster family, along the way. That's indeed his style, Pales smiled, perhaps recalling something, showing a hint of nostalgia. Then he looked at Roland and asked, is there anything you need me to do? Pales knew very well that if there was nothing, Lucifer shouldn't have time to look for him. I need an emotion of sadness, perhaps you can provide it to me, Roland said, smiling at Pales. An emotion of sadness. Pales was stunned for a moment. He clearly took some time to understand the meaning of these words, then cautiously asked, how should I do it? Recall the things in your life that made you genuinely feel sad, let your current mood be permeated by that sadness, and then don't resist, I will take it myself, Roland described simply. Okay, Pales frowned slightly, probably still a bit confused about this, but he still chose to do as Roland said. After all, Pales knew very well that after he had recovered to the Sequence 2 level with the help of Lucifer and witnessed Lucifer's abilities, he was already considered to have joined the other party's faction. A worker should have the self-awareness of a worker, so Pales would not refuse this request, which was strange but harmless. So Pales mobilized his emotions as much as possible, and the past events appeared in his mind. Pales's past was not beautiful, or rather, Pales once had a beautiful life. Before the Solomon Empire collapsed, although Pales did not have an advantage in the competition for the Lord of the Mysteries, he had his family and valued descendants at that time. Pales at that time enjoyed the beauty of kinship. Outwardly, he was a cruel marauder angel, but inwardly, he was like an old man from an ordinary family. However, everything came to an abrupt end with the second fall of Black Emperor Solomon. Pales lost everything in a very short time, and the Zoroaster family also disintegrated, to the point where even the bloodline is almost extinct now. Pales rarely thought about these things, but this was not because he didn't care, but simply because thinking about it was useless. So at this moment, under indulgence, Pales's mood quickly became heavy, and a real sadness lingered in his heart. Chapter 388. Roland finally becomes a demigod. Alright, thank you for your cooperation. Lucifer's voice finally sounded at a certain moment, and Pales broke free from his memories. He looked at the gentle man in front of him, gazing at one of his only remaining descendants in this world, and asked, can I know what it will be used for? I can't tell you the specifics, but I can say it will play a relatively important role, Roland said with a smile. That's good. Pales seemed to smile with some relief, saying, it seems I'm not completely useless, I can still do something for you. Roland glanced at Pales. He knew why the other party said that. Pales had not yet broken free from his recent emotions, thus feeling an instinctive sense of debt and a desire to compensate him, a descendant of the Zoroaster family. Roland didn't feel guilty about accepting this, as he had also helped this ancestor. So he just said, do you still remember Mobert Zoroaster? You know Mobert. Pales showed a surprised expression. Mobert Zoroaster, a member of the Zoroaster family who disappeared in the 4th epoch, was a descendant Pales valued greatly. By blood, he wasn't even that distant from Pales, barely counting as his great-grandson. He's still alive, although not in a great state, and might die completely soon. Roland looked at Pales, briefly explaining Mobert's situation, and finally said, "If you want to save him, you can contact Fool. They will contact you when the time is right." Fool's contact method was no secret to Pales, who had witnessed the City of Silver incident. I understand, thank you. Pales nodded. He knew this was compensation, the compensation for providing the sad emotions this time. Although Pales hadn't originally intended to ask for compensation for this matter, he really couldn't refuse this compensation either. After getting what he wanted from Pales, Roland didn't stay long, chose to bid farewell and leave, and returned to one of his safe houses. Roland hummed a tune while finishing cleaning the beakers needed to concoct the potion, then took a deep breath, preparing to concoct the Joy Believer potion. Roland flipped his hand, and the main ingredient for concocting the Joy Believer potion appeared in his hand. The moment he held the main ingredient, some information flooded into his mind. Roland raised his eyebrows, already knowing how to use this abstract auxiliary ingredient to concoct the potion. Roland put the Joy Believer characteristic into the beaker. Then, the small bottle containing Antigonus's tear of joy appeared. Roland unscrewed the cap and dripped the tear onto the Joy Believer characteristic. The characteristic, which was originally a strange white, underwent a marvelous change the moment it came into contact with the tear, directly transforming from solid to liquid, even bubbling in the beaker, and its color turned a deep crimson. Roland watched the changes in the potion, his expression unchanged as he raised his hand. Two different colors converged in his palm. One was a deep black, like mist or clouds, and the other was based on blue, forming the image of a water drop. They were the concretization of desperate memories and sad emotions. Then, without Roland seeming to do anything, these two masses of color surged into the deep crimson potion. The next second, it seemed as if millions of colors bloomed simultaneously within the potion, yet they weren't dazzling. Instead, they possessed a breathtaking beauty. It was at this moment that Roland raised the cup of Joy Believer potion and then drank it in one gulp. The feeling of this advancement was different from before. Roland saw neither the familiar chaos nor the main body attempting to lure him back. All Roland felt was peace and nothingness. It was as if everything in the world didn't matter at this moment. Roland's will floated in the boundless pure white. He couldn't muster any spirit, nor did he have any other thoughts. All he could feel was peace, only nothingness. But Roland didn't reject this. Instead, he felt a sense of familiarity, as if a very, very long time ago, he had quietly watched in a void like this, observing the myriad things in this world, witnessing everything that happened. And just as Roland was almost sinking into this void, a mass of color suddenly appeared in this pure white space, instantly capturing Roland's gaze. He almost subconsciously raised his hand to touch that mass of color. In an instant, intense joy, despair, and sadness erupted simultaneously. Roland was momentarily stunned. As he was plastered by this mass of emotions, his own memories and feelings also revived in Roland's heart. At this moment, Roland suddenly understood the meaning of the abstract auxiliary ingredients of the Joy Believer potion. The celestial worthy and Nyarlathotep had a certain mystical connection, so symbolically, the angels of the Go-3 family were also inseparably linked to him, this little Naya. Therefore, their most intense emotions, the most intense joy, despair, and sadness, could, through this symbolism, influence him in reverse. At the same time, many voices sounded in Roland's ears. Those voices were very noisy, almost indistinguishable. But Roland still chose to listen carefully. He heard people praying to him, expressing gratitude, some were cursing him, wishing he would die immediately, others were simply discussing him, their tone not lacking in reverence. They were people who knew about the Rose School of Thought incident, people whose fates had been changed by Roland, people who either loved or hated Roland. Their existence, their voices, their emotions, at this moment, completely filled the pure white space. Thus, the silence was broken, and nothingness was replaced by existence. Roland suddenly smiled. He already knew where the difficulty in his advancement to demigod lay. It wasn't interference from the outside world as before, but the void originating from within him. Be it the ritual or the auxiliary ingredients, they were precisely for resisting this void. The next second, Roland opened his eyes in the real world. Ah, finally. Roland let out a breath, put down the beaker in his hand, and showed a heartfelt smile. I am finally a demigod. Even Roland was very happy about finally advancing to Sequence 4 Joy Believer. After the brief joy, Roland then began to sense the abilities the Joy Believer potion brought him with great interest. First, Roland's spirituality undoubtedly saw a huge increase, even greater than the increase in previous advancements. Second, the abilities of the previous sequences were strengthened. For example, the Rule Oddity ability, as Roland expected, lowered the requirements for generating rules, and the upper limit of the Incarnation ability was raised to Sequence 1, and so on. Almost all previous abilities were strengthened. However, this time, these old skills didn't really proliferate into new abilities. The changes were basically in ability strength, usage requirements, or usage quantity. Besides that, what Roland paid the most attention to was naturally the core ability of the Joy Believer. Chapter 389, Almost Became a Witch. The core ability of the Joy Believer is called Joy Dice. Its effect is very simple. The Joy Dice will automatically roll every 24 hours, and based on the result of the roll, it will randomly grant Roland the ability of any sequence from the 22 existing pathways on Earth, with an upper limit of Sequence 0 and a lower limit of Sequence 9. The ability will last until the next roll. Simply put, this is an ability with a godlike upper limit and a ghost-like lower limit, focusing on entrusting everything to the unknown. Where did this bring me? Is this still a Western Cthulhu-esque worldview? What kind of cultivation nascent soul stage is this? Roland couldn't help but complain. Of course, he also knew that the Joy Dice was actually much more reliable than the nascent soul stage, as nascent soul cultivators could genuinely randomly revert to the Chi condensation stage, while the Joy Dice only granted abilities and did not strip Roland of his other abilities. So, even if Roland truly rolled Sequence 9, he still had enough ability to protect himself. No wonder it's called the Joy Dice, this is truly joyful. Roland shook his head, not really dissatisfied with this ability. Although rolling Sequence 9 would be quite frustrating, thinking about potentially rolling Sequence 0 was still very happy. Roland then turned his attention to the digestion progress of the Joy Believer potion. His expression then became strange as he said, "The Joy Believer potion has already been mostly digested, why?" Roland began to ponder the reason. It was clear at a glance that the so-called Joy Believer was an advanced version of the Joker. So, inferring from the acting method of the Joker, was the acting method of the Joy Believer also about finding joy? No, it shouldn't be just that. Joy Believer, joy and believer. The joy aspect should refer to finding joy, following one's inner thoughts, finding joy that makes oneself happy. So what about believer? Roland stroked his chin, thinking, I believe in myself. Roland thought of his alias, Chaos Dominator. Although it seemed to have a low sense of presence, and many people knew what the so-called Chaos Dominator was about, Roland had actually been promoting this alias all along. After all, when Roland is promoted to Sequence 0 in the future, he plans to use this name to establish a church. Could it be because of this? Roland raised an eyebrow, thinking of Klein's action in the original work where he instantly digested the mystery potion by saying, I serve myself, and felt that this possibility was very high. After all, his situation was actually quite similar to Klein's. Furthermore, because he was inherently Little Naya, Roland truly fit the setting of the Trinity. And the name of Sequence 0 of the Chaos Pathway is precisely, Lord of Joy. From this perspective, it doesn't seem strange that Roland has digested most of the Joy Believer potion. No, the main reason I've digested most of the potion should be because I've practiced the principle of joy. Furthermore, considering what I've been doing lately, it might be precisely because I haven't been seriously acting as a believer of the Chaos Dominator during this time that it didn't instantly digest. Roland thought of this, raised an eyebrow, and said, seen this way, the matter of establishing a Chaos Church can be put on the agenda. To ensure there are enough beliefs as anchors in the future, Roland naturally also needs to establish his own church. This won't be very difficult either. After all, the difficulty for others in establishing a church is mainly competing for faith with the seven gods and other hidden existences. However, Roland doesn't have this concern. If he wants to establish a church, others will only strongly support him. Let me think, it's probably best to leave this matter to Little Red. He should be quite familiar with the process. Roland had a suitable candidate in mind. Although theoretically Saussure might be more suitable, he still has a lot of work. On the other hand, after the matters with the Rose School of Thought ended, the matters in the border city were shared by Saussure, and with the help of an assistant, Medici actually doesn't have that much to do anymore. After deciding on the matter of establishing a church, Roland then began to think about the promotion to sequence 3 inches Time Rememberer. The auxiliary materials required for the Time Rememberer potion are also abstract. Its description is, a memory covering all important historical nodes within at least 1,000 years, which can be pieced together from different people's memories. The longer the time included, the better the effect. Honestly, is this tailor-made? Roland raised an eyebrow. For others, obtaining the memory described above might be difficult, but for Roland, it was really just so-so. After all, others who want to obtain memories covering all important events within at least 1,000 years might need to search everywhere, do archaeology, excavate secrets, and so on. But Roland doesn't need to, because his time shadow ability focuses on getting whatever memory he wants by simply pulling the person involved. But all the important nodes, tisk, it still feels a bit troublesome. Not difficult, but it will definitely be quite tedious. Roland shook his head, and then turned his attention to another matter, which was the ritual for promoting to sequence 3 inches Time Rememberer. The requirement for the ritual is very simple, at least not difficult for Roland. It requires this: create an event in the current world significant enough to be recorded in history, with the scope of the event involving no less than 1 million people. This requirement might be difficult for others, but for Roland, it's just a matter of convenience. That's good. At this rate, perhaps I can complete the ritual and be promoted to sequence 3 on the day the spark officially ignites. I wonder what kind of abilities a Time Rememberer will have. Roland pinched his chin, guessed in his mind for a while, pondered over a few possibilities for a bit, but didn't make a rash conclusion. He then stretched, and then Roland felt something. With a flip of his hand, an exquisite dice appeared in his palm. This was the joy dice. At this moment, the joy dice was spinning in Roland's palm. This process was not controlled by Roland but was the result of the dice's own action. Roland could even see the names of various sequences flashing in midair as the dice spun, including names familiar to Roland, such as Seer, Scribe, Abomination, and so on. Roland watched these names flash by one and felt a rare sense of nervousness, like drawing cards before Transmigration. Even knowing the probability of getting trash was highest, he still couldn't help but anticipate the appearance of a golden legendary. And just then, the dice's spinning speed finally slowed down. Under Roland's gaze, it slowly revealed a name: Disaster Witch. Holy crap, how could he have forgotten about this? The 22 divine sequences also included the witch pathway. Roland's heart almost stopped beating at that moment. Fortunately, heaven seemed to truly favor him. The dice, which was almost stopping its rotation, finally flipped to another side, showing a new name: Death. Phew. Roland immediately let out a sigh of relief and sat down on the chair. He felt that his mood had never fluctuated so wildly in his life. He could only say that the joy dice truly lived up to its name. Chapter 390, Roland can't come for nothing. But, death. Roland blinked his eyes, feeling the power of sequence 0 death granted to him by the die of pleasure. Suddenly, a strange idea came to him. Since I am death now, can I help suppress his other half of the soul, suppress the death uniqueness? Roland felt this was quite promising. Just as Roland was preparing to go to the numinous episcopate to discuss establishing a church with Medici, Ask was also currently residing in the numinous episcopate. Therefore, Roland immediately stood up without hesitation, deciding to go to the numinous episcopate to give them both a surprise. When Roland arrived at the numinous episcopate, Medici was handling work. Although he wasn't as busy as before, it was naturally impossible for him to be completely idle. The necessary work still needed to be dealt with. Who? Feeling the aura that appeared beside him, Medici became alert almost instantly. Then he froze for a moment, looking at Roland not far away with some surprise. "Hey, Little Red, did you miss me?" Roland smiled and greeted him. "You." Medici's brows furrowed. He looked Roland up and down and said uncertainly, "Death." The reason he didn't immediately recognize Roland's aura just now and thought he was an outsider was because this time, the aura of death on Roland was too strong, causing even Medici to mistake him. "That's right, I am death now." Roland nodded without hesitation. "You." Medici's expression was strange for a second, but then he relaxed. This was mainly because he remembered Roland's endless array of abilities from various sequences. Although the upper limit of the abilities the other party had shown before was only Angel, this was Roland after all. Medici thought for a moment, then looked at Roland and said, "You've advanced." "Yes, I am sequence 4 now." Roland nodded, not hiding anything, and said with a smile, "This has given me some new gains. For example, the death ability I'm using now is the effect of a new ability." Hearing this, Medici's expression wasn't surprised. He just couldn't help but mutter something under his breath, then said, "You didn't just come here to show off your new ability, did you?" "Actually, there is a part of showing off." Roland blinked his eyes and said without any embarrassment. Medici choked for a moment. He pursed his lips, tidied the documents on the desk, then showed a cold smile and said, "Since you're so bored, why don't you help me with my work?" No, I still have serious business to attend to." Roland immediately shook his head, not wasting a second, and said, "Actually, I came to see you for serious business too. You know I also have a Chaos Dominator alias, and I am now sequence 4, so." Roland paused here, looked at Medici, and said, "I think it's time for me to establish a church." Medici looked up at him upon hearing this, then realized something, let out a scoff, and said, "You're dragging me in to do the grunt work again, aren't you? Those who are capable should do more, those who are capable should do more." Roland quickly appeased his most capable tool, saying, "I know this is very troublesome, but you are the only person I can ask. I really don't trust others. And when the Chaos Church is established, you will be the top figure under the Chaos Dominator, and you won't lack faith then." "Hey!" Medici let out a cold laugh, but he didn't plan to refuse. On one hand, he himself indeed needed believers. On the other hand, whether it was because he was currently working for Roland or because of the relationship between the two, he really couldn't refuse Roland's request. After all, you can't really expect Roland, this hands-off boss, to establish the church himself, can you? "I must have been truly lacking in virtue in my past life to meet you in this life." Medici finally couldn't help but curse under his breath, then looked at Roland irritably and said, "Have the church's doctrines been set? Has the Holy Scripture been written? Do you have any ideas for the basic framework? Have you informed the others under you about this?" Roland showed a slightly embarrassed smile and said, No, none of it." Medici. He knew it. For a moment, Medici truly wanted to just quit. Roland, perhaps sensing Medici's speechlessness, quickly spoke up at this moment, "Although none of this is done, I will discuss these matters with you later, and I will also arrange for others to assist you, Little Red, in establishing the church, such as 200 assistants or something. I definitely won't make you do it all by yourself." Only then did Medici's expression improve slightly. Roland then thought of something else and said, "Oh right, Little Red, do you want to obtain the Red Priest uniqueness?" Roland suddenly thought of something. As far as he knew, the current Red Priest uniqueness, which is 001, Salinger Blood Flag, should be in Harabergen's hands, or more accurately, sealed by Harabergen in the City of Exile, Aurora. The reason for this is that the Red Priest unfortunately fell into the hands of Death Salinger at the end of the 4th epic, was forcibly accommodated by this madman, and was thus contaminated by the Source Eternal Dark River. Finally, after Death was defeated and fell, the Red Priest uniqueness formed 001, Salinger Blood Flag, and, for some reason, fell into Harabergen's hands and was sealed by the other party. After all, things contaminated by the source are already dirty, and it's not ideal for ordinary Sequence 0 to use this item again. "I know where it is, Harabergen contacted me before." Medici was clearly not unaware of the matter of 001, Salinger Blood Flag. A hint of gloom appeared between his brows, and he couldn't help but tisk in annoyance. For Medici, the Red Priest uniqueness being contaminated by the Eternal Dark River was clearly bad news. This meant that if he couldn't remove the Red Priest's contamination, it would be difficult for him to use it to become Sequence Zero. Roland raised an eyebrow after hearing Medici's words, not surprised. Harabergen, as a stand god, was inherently intelligent. It was understandable that he hadn't cooperated with their side before, but since they had reached a formal cooperation, it was perfectly normal for him to contact Medici to inform him about the situation of the Red Priest uniqueness. "What are your thoughts on this?" Roland simply asked immediately after. "What thoughts could I have? If I really can't directly accommodate the Red Priest uniqueness, I'll just swallow the Primal Witch first." Medici said this with great ambition, but his expression wasn't very good. The main reason was that he thought of the gossip about the Primal Witch that Roland had once told him. The thought of having to swallow such a crazy woman made Medici feel a bit nauseous. After all, Medici was truly out of place among the madmen and madwomen of the other hunter and witch pathways. He was a bit too normal. Roland's expression wasn't very good either. After all, he was genuinely a bit worried that Medici might be contaminated by the madmen and madwomen next door. And frankly, given Medici's personality, he wasn't actually suited to become the calamity of destruction, but rather a simple Red Priest. As for what to do about the apocalypse in that case, silly child, this world needed the calamity of destruction before Roland arrived. If the world still needed the calamity of destruction after Roland arrived, wouldn't Roland have come for nothing? Chapter 391, Little Naya and Yog, the story of Mother Goat. After all, the most important function of the apocalypse is to synthesize the fourth pillar with the eternal darkness, serving as a mutual destruction guarantee against the outer gods. Coincidentally, Roland alone can serve as this mutual destruction guarantee. No one would think that after the Nyarlathotep power within Roland is released, only Earth would be destroyed, right? Furthermore, Roland doesn't really want to bother with any mutual destruction guarantee. He'd rather be promoted to Old One, Chaos, when the time comes, then with the new Lord of the Mysteries in his left hand and the new God in his right, followed by a string of Sequence 0s, go give the outer gods a little Nyarlathotep shock. Roland had a premonition that his Old One would have a very high gold content. So, after thinking for a few seconds while pinching his chin, Roland looked at Medici and said, "Actually, I can try to see if I can remove the pollution the Red Priest encountered. Logically speaking, since he can remove the pollution from the outer gods, there's no reason he can't solve the pollution of the primordial seed. Especially since he is currently death, how can this not be considered a favorable alignment of time, place, and people?" Roland felt he could give it a try. Anyway, he's not afraid of messing up something like uniqueness. Medici was stunned for a moment upon hearing this. Immediately after, he looked at Roland, a series of things the other party had done flashing through his mind. At once, a thought appeared in his mind. Maybe Roland really can. "Then, you go give it a try," Medici said, uncharacteristically hesitant. Go ahead. I haven't come into contact with any primordial seed other than Saphira Castle yet, so it's a good chance to study it. Once I'm done with you quickly, I can still go resolve Ask's matter." Roland's interest was also piqued, and he quickly nodded. The two decided to act immediately and soon appeared in the divine kingdom of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. "You can remove the pollution the Red Priest uniqueness encountered?" Harabergen asked, slightly surprised. Then, remembering something, he said with some relief, "That's right, after all, you can even resolve the pollution from the outer gods. I haven't confirmed if I can remove it yet, but I think I can try. Anyway, that thing definitely can't pollute me." Roland shrugged, then, remembering something, stuffed a bubble-like object into Medici's hand beside him. "You hold on to this, it should be able to protect you from the pollution of the primordial seed," Roland explained. The bubble he gave Medici naturally originated from the power belonging to Yog within him. Medici took the crystal clear, multicolored bubble that seemed to contain infinite mysteries just by looking at it. Uncharacteristically, he didn't say anything defiant. Although he was confident, he also knew the danger of the primordial seed. The Red Angel himself had been polluted by the City of Disaster and only managed to break free upon death. Harabergen's gaze was involuntarily drawn to that bubble. His vision seemed to blur for a moment. At this instant, he felt an instinctive attraction and infinite mystery. However, before Harabergen could continue looking, Roland had already pulled Medici behind him, completely blocking his view. Then, Roland stretched out his hand and snapped his fingers. Snap. Harabergen suddenly sobered up. He looked at Roland somewhat bewildered, then furrowed his brow and said, Sorry, I forgot that in a sense, you share the same origin as him, Roland said, slightly apologetically, and asked, are you alright? I'm alright. Harabergen was silent for a second, then shook his head. He looked at Roland, hesitated, but still asked, may I know what that was? A great existence, perhaps considered a higher being than God. Roland said with an uncertain tone, then smiled and added, of course, it doesn't really have anything to do with you. Unless something unexpected happens, you will never come into contact with him. Harabergen's expression could not hide his astonishment. He was clearly hearing about such an existence for the first time, but considering the extraordinary world had never been fully explored and Roland himself was indeed mysterious enough, he didn't question anything. Instead, he cautiously asked, what if something unexpected happens? This time, Roland also fell silent. He was clearly hesitant. After a moment, he said, I'm not sure. Harabergen was clearly somewhat surprised. Medici also looked at him. Compared to Harabergen, who wanted to ask but found it inconvenient, the Red Angel, who was already good friends with Roland, had no reservations and asked directly, are there things in this world that even you are unsure of? Look at what you're saying. I'm not some omniscient and omnipotent god. Roland shrugged, then continued, I'm indeed unsure what his arrival would bring. Theoretically, he holds no malice towards this world, he can even be said to be one of the few existences among the many, that bears no ill will towards humanity. In fact, the last time I summoned him, he saved my world. But, Roland said, turning his head to look into the distance, this world has never been such that only deliberate destruction can bring about ruin. The original creator's revival back then wasn't aimed at destroying the world, but he still destroyed the world that existed before. And that existence, even if he doesn't intend to, his mere unintentional actions are enough to cause this world to completely fall. Harabergen and Medici fell silent. They could completely understand these words. After all, such a phenomenon also existed in this world. For example, if mythical creatures revealed their true form, even if they didn't intend to, they would still bring disaster to ordinary people who saw their original forms. Harabergen and Medici were more focused on contemplating the information revealed in these words. Among them, Harabergen was naturally more startled and uncertain, as he didn't actually know much about Roland, at least he didn't know Roland's origin. Medici, on the other hand, was much calmer. He had long since had suspicions about certain things, mainly because a certain person had truly not deliberately concealed them. So, after his surprise, he asked thoughtfully, it sounds like you're very familiar with that being. How should I put this? I was picked up by him and raised for a period of time. Roland blinked and said, this was the truth. After his promotion this time, he recalled some past events, such as what his relationship with Yog truly was. The result was not beyond his expectations. It wasn't a very complicated story. Simply put, a little Naya, due to excessive nihilism, decided to die but didn't succeed. He was conveniently picked up by the passing Yog, and then learned some strange things from him. As for the mother of the Black Mountain Goat, little Naya also met her during this period. Mainly, Mother Goat had always wanted to pull Yog into having a few more offspring and frequently came to bother Yog, sometimes even bothering little Naya. The result, of course, was constant setbacks. Finally, little Naya, having completed his studies, returned home. After countless years of mutually causing trouble with his main body, he finally reached an agreement with Nyarlathotep and performed a justifiable separation, under the witness of Yog and the mother of the Black Mountain Goat. After the justifiable separation, little Naya embarked on a journey alone in search of the meaning of existence. That was the whole story. Chapter 392, Roland pulling the flag. Medici naturally didn't know Roland's past. After hearing Roland's words, he just glanced at Roland with a slight surprise, his gaze as if he had heard something rare. Hey, what's with that look? Roland immediately became dissatisfied after being looked at like that by him. It's just a bit hard to imagine that you would also have a time when you needed someone to support you, Medici said truthfully, his tone uncharacteristically not sarcastic. You talk as if I popped out of a rock. Weren't you also raised by sorcerer? Roland curled his lip, accusing someone of double standards. Then, he changed the subject and said, besides, isn't the current focus on resolving the contamination of the Red Priest uniqueness? Speaking of this, Roland looked at Medici and said with a smile, if the contamination of the Red Priest uniqueness can really be resolved, Medici, you'll be a genuine war angel again. Although he didn't know if Medici could accommodate the Red Priest uniqueness now, there was one thing Roland was certain of. With the Sun God present, even if Medici didn't meet the conditions, the Sun God could help him forcibly suppress the uniqueness, allowing Medici to accommodate it. This was the power possessed by a pillar-level being. Even if the Sun God was not yet a complete pillar, he could still achieve this. I was a war angel to begin with, Medici scoffed. However, the slight curve of his lips showed that his mood wasn't bad at the moment. Obviously, Medici also had some expectations about re-accommodating the uniqueness. This wasn't strange. Perhaps Medici didn't have too much obsession with becoming the Red Priest or the Calamity of Destruction, but he was still somewhat concerned about the uniqueness he had once accommodated and then lost. So the pressure fell on Haribergen. Facing the gazes that the two simultaneously directed at him, although Haribergen still had many questions he wanted to ask, he also knew that now was not the time to ask. So, he simply revealed a polite smile and said, please follow me. Haribergen didn't hesitate at all. He decisively had his avatar lead the two to the place where the Red Priest uniqueness was sealed, which was the City of Exile, Merola. This was not an ordinary city. There were no residents who could be called normal people in the city. There were only all sorts of strange humanoid existences. They might already be monsters, or they might still be considered human, but most of them were not good people, basically all serious criminals. Of course, there were also some monsters that were less humanoid. Roland looked at the vicious-looking residents of Merola around him with interest. As expected, he saw that these strange beings, who might appear fierce and terrifying to ordinary people, almost all chose to avoid his gaze in fear at this moment. Roland guessed that this was probably because of the aura of death he currently possessed. Are you interested in these monsters? Medici was clearly not interested in the current state of Merola. After glancing at Roland, he asked, I'm interested in everything worth studying, Roland replied with a smile, then looked in a certain direction. That was the direction of 001, the Salinger blood flag. Let's go. Let's see what your former property, Little Red, has been ruined into, Roland said to Medici with amusement, then eagerly walked towards the direction of the underground mausoleum. Soon, they arrived at the wilderness where 001, the Salinger blood flag, was located, reaching a mountain of corpses. Roland raised his head and saw a flag planted at the peak of the mountain. It was a flag stained with dark red blood, with scorched marks on it, making one imagine a history full of blood and fire. Roland stared at the flag for a while, then turned his head to look at Medici. At this moment, Medici was also looking at the flag. His eyes didn't show nostalgia or any other specific emotion, only the mark of the bloody banner between his brows was exceptionally vivid at this moment. Although from a sense of ritual, it would be cooler for you to pull the flag now, for safety reasons, should I do it instead? Roland spoke at this moment. Why can't we do it together? Medici glanced at him and retorted. All right, I respect your choice. Roland blinked, thought for a second, then nodded with a smile. He didn't even forget the presence-less Haribergen beside him, turning his head to look at him and asking, do you want to come along? No, thank you for your kindness, but I don't think I'm suitable to appear in the following situation. Haribergen shook his head and refused with a smile. Roland wasn't surprised either. He then looked at 001, the Salinger blood flag, again, and walked towards it without hesitation. Medici walked silently alongside him. Perhaps sensing the approaching danger, 001, the Salinger blood flag, changed at this moment. This made Roland blink, feeling emotions like fear and dread that didn't belong to him appear in his heart. These emotions undoubtedly came from the Salinger blood flag. This flag wanted him to submit. How interesting. Roland curled the corner of his mouth. While instantly dispelling those emotions, he snapped his fingers. Snap. At this moment, the power of chaos descended upon this area. Becoming a demigod didn't just bring Roland the power of a joy believer, it also brought him further control over the fragments of power within him that originally belonged to Nyarlathotep. After all, Roland was also Nyarlathotep. He was even once the most special avatar of the main body. How could he not be able to control his own power? Below the mountain peak, Hariburgen looked at Roland, whose aura had suddenly become terrifying, with near-stunned surprise. At this moment, he suddenly understood why the proud Osius was so afraid of Roland. Some existences could instill instinctive fear in life forms with just a glance. Hariburgen closed his eyes the next second. He knew he couldn't keep watching. Even if Roland had no intention of harming him, continuing to watch could lead to him being contaminated by that power. And on the Mountain of Corpses, the Salinger blood flag, which had just released its power attempting to make people submit, suddenly became precarious at this moment. The difference in status between the two was too great, causing the Salinger blood flag to undoubtedly suffer a backlash. But the Red Priest uniqueness would never easily submit. Therefore, in front of Roland and Medici, countless puppets and corpses struggled to get up, wanting to form an army to stop the two's advance. Truly tenacious. The Red Priest is indeed an existence with vigorous vitality, Roland commented, glancing at Medici beside him as he said this, clearly implying something. If I weren't tenacious, I would have died completely 800 years ago. In that case, it wouldn't matter to me, but you would probably tragically lose your best tool. Medici glanced at him and said unhurriedly. Because of the protection of Yog's power, he was not affected by Nyarlathotep's power. Chapter 393, The War Angel's Oath of Allegiance. You've changed, Little Red. You can actually so calmly call yourself a tool now. Tisk tisk, you're finished. If this continues, you'll turn into Saussure eventually. Roland shook his head dramatically. As he spoke, the aura of death spread, bringing equal rest to every being in this area except Medici. Don't forget, today's Roland is a genuine death. Although he could indeed continue to mobilize the power of the Nia Shard and use status to suppress the Red Priest uniqueness, wouldn't that make his golden legend drawn today for nothing? From this perspective, Roland quite liked the Red Priest uniqueness's tenacity. It gave him a chance to experiment with a new toy. Medici rolled his eyes irritably, too lazy to debate the fact that his current workload wasn't necessarily much lower than Saussure's. Medici simply lifted his foot and walked towards the Salinger blood flag. After Roland used the power of death, those resurrected legions undoubtedly fell into rest, naturally unable to block him anymore. Roland smiled and followed behind Medici. The two successfully arrived near the Salinger blood flag. At this moment, although the Salinger blood flag was in a weakened state, it was clearly in an extremely stressed condition and was about to act again when facing the approaching two. At this moment, Medici reached out and touched his brow. The bright red banner seemed to resonate with the Salinger blood flag for an instant, but the next second the resonance disappeared, replaced by double the repulsion. The Salinger blood flag did not recognize Medici. It was hard to say what kind of mood Medici was in at this moment, but judging from his icy expression, it was probably not good. Poor Little Red. Roland's voice sounded at this moment. With one hand, he steadied Medici, who had almost stumbled back from the repulsion's impact. With the other hand, he gently grasped the flagpole of the Salinger blood flag. In an instant, a power strong enough to make an angel rot almost invaded Roland's body, while the power belonging to the river of eternal darkness attempted to corrode his soul, bringing him eternal rest and making his thoughts fall into slumber. PFF'd. Roland truly couldn't help but chuckle at this moment. Then, the power belonging to chaos counterattacked along the invading forces. The Salinger blood flag, which had just become more vibrant, turned dim and lackluster at this moment. Is this the power of the river of eternal darkness? How invigorating, Roland said mockingly. As his words fell, the Salinger blood flag trembled violently. The flag, which had been mixed with the aura of the river of eternal darkness, almost visibly shed the aura of death and slumber, becoming pure once again. Rumble. The entire city also trembled at this moment, as if their foundation had suffered an irreversible shake, or perhaps it was simply affected by the Salinger blood flag. The underground mausoleum also began to be destroyed. Only the area where Roland and Medici were remained quiet. This quietness was not due to anything else, but the result of being forcibly restrained by the power of chaos. Finally, the aura of the Salinger blood flag, which was originally in a mixed state, completely shed the portion belonging to the river of eternal darkness. Roland also exerted force at this moment and pulled out the flag. The flag, which would display its power in anyone else's hands, was quiet in Roland's hand, as if it were truly just an ordinary flag. Roland examined the flag with a critical eye for a few moments before handing it to Medici beside him. Roland smiled and said, "Although you're not its white moonlight, it doesn't matter. A forced melon isn't sweet, but it quenches thirst. My agreement to this marriage is enough." Medici looked up at him, his ruby-like eyes at this moment wondering what he was thinking. He suddenly let out a scoff, then took the flag from Roland's hand. The flag that had just repelled Medici was now obedient and quiet. Medici glanced at the flag, then looked at Roland and said in a rare, non-sarcastic tone, "Is His Majesty bestowing a marriage?" Roland was momentarily stunned, then laughed heartily. "That is precisely our intention." After a pause, Roland couldn't help but say, "So, Minister Hong, seeing how dearly we cherish you, could you perhaps perform that thing, that thing?" Medici glanced at Roland and said, "Which one?" "That one, of course." Roland looked at Medici with dissatisfaction and said, "Don't tell me you know the title, His Majesty, but don't know what I'm referring to. You must have secretly communicated with Bethel. Hey, that's all you amount to." Medici sneered, seemingly speechless. But the next second, the war angel casually planted the flag beside him, knelt on one knee, placed one hand over his chest, and lowered his head that was always held high. His tone was rarely serious. "I am loyal to you, I follow you, I belong to you, Your Majesty. I will fight for you until you go mad and destroy the world or I die." Having said this, Medici finally looked up at Roland. He then showed a slightly provocative smile and said, "Satisfied?" Satisfied, I'm extremely satisfied." Roland nodded repeatedly, his entire being even a little excited at this moment. It was clear he had been looking forward to this scene for a long time. Amount to. Medici scoffed, then said irritably, "So, can I stand up now? This ground is quite uncomfortable. Rise, beloved minister." Roland quickly helped Medici up, and casually tucked the Red Priest uniqueness from beside them into his arms, then looked around. Because the Salinger blood flag had been changed and taken away, this place clearly couldn't be maintained anymore. The entire wasteland area, except for the region where Roland was due to his power maintaining its original state, only the spot where Harabergen stood remained unchanged. Other places were in poor condition. Isn't there a one-click restore? Roland rubbed his chin, thought for a second, then pulled Medici down the mountain of corpses and came before the closed-eyed Harabergen. "Is it over?" Harabergen clearly sensed their arrival and opened his eyes. "Yeah, but this place seems to be destroyed. You might need to fix it later." Roland nodded and said, "It's all right, it's not a big deal." Harabergen shook his head, clearly not bothered by this. He simply looked at the flag in Medici's hand. The Red Priest uniqueness, once contaminated by the river of eternal darkness, had clearly regained its purity at this moment. Even though he had anticipated this, Harabergen couldn't help but feel a little emotional upon truly seeing this scene. This is Lucifer's power, this is the power above the old days. Chapter 394, The Scheming Sorcerer. Roland saw that Harabergen itself didn't care about the destruction of the wasteland, so he naturally didn't mention helping to fix it. He just looked at Medici excitedly and said, "Then next, we'll go find Sorcerer, and then let the Sun God help you reaccommodate the uniqueness. That's what you call seeing things through from beginning to end. After all, Adam caused you to lose the uniqueness, so Grisha should naturally be responsible for this. As the saying goes, there's no time like the present." Roland always acted decisively. Okay. Medici originally wanted to say that he could try to accommodate it directly without the Sun God, but he swallowed the words back just as they reached his lips. Because Medici felt Roland was right, since Adam caused him to lose the Red Priest uniqueness, it was very reasonable for the Sun God to help him reaccommodate it. "Perhaps I could get a chance to watch." Harabergen couldn't help but speak up. It naturally knew that pillars could help others forcibly accommodate uniqueness, but it had never witnessed it firsthand, so it naturally wanted to watch. The main reason was that Harabergen arrived late. When it followed the Sun God, Medici had already accommodated the Red Priest uniqueness, and the two Amons who came later were in a rather special state, so it hadn't witnessed their birth either. "Do you agree?" Roland looked at Medici, choosing to seek the opinion of the person involved. Roland was still very respectful towards his friends. Medici glanced at him, then looked at Heribergen. His relationship with this old dragon had never been good, even becoming hostile for a time after the sun god's fall. But since the sun god had now forgiven it, and Heribergen had chosen to return under the sun god's command, while Medici himself had already switched sides due to the Red Pot incident and the sun god's tacit approval, he naturally had no need to continue opposing the other party. So Medici nodded and said casually, "Okay. Thank you for your generosity." Heribergen couldn't help but reveal a smile, its eyes filled with anticipation for the unknown. Thus, the group of three left the city of exile, Mora, and arrived at the border city. At that time, Saussurier was working. More accurately, he was handing over relevant work to Little K. Jack and Xiao Amon were pointing things out nearby, occasionally helping, and occasionally being a hindrance. Sensing familiar auras, Saussurier looked up from his documents and saw the three familiar figures. This confused Saussurier for a moment. He didn't quite understand how these three guys ended up together. But the next second, Saussurier's gaze fell upon the flag in Medici's hand. Even if it was just an avatar, Saussurier, whose vision hadn't been lost because of this, instantly understood what it was and said with some surprise, "The pollution on the Red Priest uniqueness has been resolved." Saussurier naturally knew about the Salinger blood flag. Even if he didn't know originally, after this period of information gathering and exchange, he had long since learned many things. "That's right." Roland nodded, briefly explained what happened today, and finally looked at Saussurier. "So I want Grisha to help Medici accommodate the uniqueness and become a true war angel." As a side note, due to Medici's terrifying work intensity, a certain Roland, whose conscience was uneasy, had long since paid Medici the conqueror trait he possessed in advance. After all, if he didn't do this, Medici might not be able to handle some situations. "I understand. I will inform the Lord about this. He will help Medici accommodate the uniqueness, this is his responsibility." Saussurier said this, looking at Medici gently, with a hint of relief. Saussurier had always felt guilty and pained about Medici being boiled in the hot pot. Even if it wasn't strictly his fault, Saussurier still couldn't let it go. Now Medici could finally shake off the past shadows a little and become a war angel again, which naturally made Saussurier feel relieved. "Tisk, don't look at me like that. That wasn't your fault." Medici could easily tell what Saussurier was thinking. He awkwardly turned his head away and said, "That is my fault. Even if you don't see me and Adam as the same person, as the true creator, I still failed to protect you." Saussurier shook his head and said seriously, "I wouldn't go so far as to blame a lunatic who couldn't control himself." Medici said this, not showing any sad expression. Instead, he said, "Besides, everything is already in the past, and I've already let go." He looked at Saussurier and said seriously, "You should let go too, Saussurier." Medici was telling the truth. He wasn't the type to be coy, and precisely because of this, after he stabbed Adam in the waist, Medici had indeed already let go of what happened back then. Of course, Medici, who had already switched sides to work for Roland, wouldn't switch back because of this. He was a man of principle. Once he chose to pledge loyalty, he wouldn't easily change. The sun god was his former master, a figure like a father to Medici, but would no longer be the object of his allegiance. The allegiance of a red angel might not have started formally, but it would never be cheap. "Sorry, I'm always a bit indecisive." Saussurier smiled slightly apologetically, then said with relief, "But I'm very happy that you can let go." "That's good." Click. Just then, the sound of a camera clicked. Saussurier and Medici simultaneously looked towards the source of the sound and, as expected, saw Roland had taken out a camera at some point and was filming them. "Don't mind me. You know, I have a little habit of liking to record key famous scenes," Roland said, holding up the camera without any embarrassment. He even egged them on. "Do you want to give each other a hug? I think it's very memorable." HMPH. Medici immediately scoffed and said irritably, "You like taking pictures so much, why didn't I see you capture that scene from before?" Medici was naturally referring to the scene where he pledged his allegiance earlier. "How do you know I didn't?" Roland glanced at Medici in confusion, then said proudly, "Not only did I film it, but I also made over 100 backups." I guarantee that even if the world is destroyed, the backups will still be there. The smile on Medici's lips froze. Saussurier, on the other hand, smiled helplessly. Then he looked at Medici and suddenly said with a smile, "So, do you need a hug?" Child. It was hard to say whether Saussurier made this suggestion at this moment out of motherly love, or out of scheming intent. No need. You should go back and hug Amon. He needs a male mother more. Medici practically squeezed this sentence out through gritted teeth. Saussurier immediately showed a regretful expression. And after the brief parent-child moment, it was time for business. Saussurier immediately went offline, and the sun god came online instead. Chapter 395. Medici once again ascends to King of Angels. The sun god had evidently learned about the situation from Saussurier. He didn't say much, only looked at Medici and asked, "Do you need to familiarize yourself with the Red Priest uniqueness again?" Hearing this, Medici's gaze fell upon the Red Priest uniqueness. Thinking of its recent rejection, he didn't show a lost or cold expression because of it. Instead, he scoffed and said, "Does that matter? It'll be fine as long as it can accommodate me." Exactly, you need to have that mindset. Roland, who was beside him, nodded repeatedly, like a foolish monarch from the feudal era arbitrarily bestowing marriages upon CPs. He said, "It's the Red Priest uniqueness's fortune to be accommodated by you, little Red." It dared to refuse. It's truly ungrateful. What white moonlight tutor? It's already gone, what right does it have to compete with you, a living person? As soon as these words were spoken, the scene fell into a strange silence for a few seconds. What was originally a simple matter of accommodating a uniqueness suddenly had a bit of melodramatic flavor. "Can I beg you to shut up?" Medici, whose expression hadn't darkened just now, did so at this moment. He glared at Roland irritably and said, "I'm just speaking the truth. Little Red, you didn't get triggered, did you?" Roland looked at Medici with an expression that could be described as innocent. "Medici, I really want to hit the boss. Is this allowed? However, you can't beat me right now." Roland spread his hands, seeing exactly what Medici was thinking. He said with a smile, "I'm sequence 0 now." Medici glanced at him expressionlessly, then sneered and said, "I don't believe you can be sequence 0 forever." As one of the people in this world who understood Roland the best and had the best relationship with him, Medici naturally knew something about certain matters, so he could roughly guess that the sequence 0 brought by Roland's new ability wouldn't last too long. This time it was Roland whose smile froze. He stared at Medici with a gloomy look for a few seconds, then showed a sorrowful expression and said, "Has all the importance I've placed on you over the years ultimately been misplaced?" Medici immediately showed an expression of discomfort, rolling his eyes and saying, "What years? Have you and I known each other for a year? Ah, look at what you're saying. As the saying goes, one day apart feels like 3 autumns. Although we haven't known each other for long, that doesn't hinder our good relationship. If you count it that way, we've known each other for many, many years." Roland was no longer heartbroken, and immediately began spouting nonsense with conviction. Medici was too lazy to bother with him anymore, but his eyes also seemed a little dazed. Had they really only known each other for such a short time? But Medici recalled what had happened in the short period of less than a year and couldn't help but fall into silence. To be fair, this less than a year had been more exciting than his previous 1,000 years. And this person, Roland, had truly left a deeper impression on Medici than anyone else he had known in the past. "So, are you still accommodating this uniqueness?" The sun god finally spoke at this moment, his voice gentle. Medici also came back to his senses, looked at the sun god, nodded, and said, "Of course." Perhaps the Red Priest uniqueness didn't recognize him, but what did that matter? Just as Roland said, a twisted melon doesn't need to be sweet, just thirst-quenching. He also didn't need the recognition of a uniqueness. As long as the people he cared about recognized him, and as long as he could use this power to fight for those who were worth it, that was enough. Roland looked at Medici, who had clearly figured things out, and a pleased smile curved on his lips. Then, with a cold gaze, he glanced at the Salinger blood flag, which seemed to sense danger and was finally stirring restlessly. So, the flag became quiet again like a chicken. Roland didn't care what the Red Priest uniqueness thought. Perhaps it valued Tutor, that crazy guy, more, but for Roland, the Red Priest uniqueness's only value was to be accommodated by Medici. Moreover, thinking of the messed up things Tutor, that crazy guy, did in the original work, Roland couldn't help but curl his lip, only feeling that the Red Priest uniqueness truly had poor taste. Of all people to fancy, it fancied a crazy guy. It truly deserved to be contaminated by the river of eternal darkness. The sun god naturally noticed this scene. He couldn't help but smile, nodded, and said, "Then let's begin." So, on this day, half a month before the year 1350, Medici once again became an King of Angels. Although he had become an King of Angels, the work that needed to be done still had to be done. So, Medici and Roland quickly returned to the numinous episcopate's base, and also brought along little Kay and the others, who had almost finished handing over their work. Heribergen didn't come with them. The old dragon wisely chose to stay behind to help Saussure, who was back online, with his work. Of course, he probably also had the idea of using this opportunity to learn about the thriving cause that Roland and the others were currently engaged in, and might even take this opportunity to inquire about some information about Roland from Saussure. After all, compared to others, Heribergen wasn't as familiar with Roland. Roland was well aware of this and tacitly allowed it. After all, he never minded his information being known by more people. Anything that could be known by others was information Roland didn't mind spreading. As for the truly core information that couldn't be leaked, Roland wouldn't tell anyone. And after returning to the numinous episcopate's base, Roland suddenly remembered something. He looked at Medici, pinching his chin, and said, "Speaking of which, did we forget to discuss the payment for the uniqueness with Heribergen?" From removing the Saphira contamination encountered when removing the Red Priest uniqueness to the entire process of letting Medici accommodate the Red Priest uniqueness, it was so smooth that Roland had actually forgotten about this matter, as if he had just picked a large cabbage from his own vegetable garden. "Don't worry, I already talked to that old dragon. You don't need to pay for the Red Priest uniqueness." Medici glanced at Roland, and perhaps because he was in a good mood, his tone was unusually gentle. Roland was stunned for a moment upon hearing this, then looked at Medici with a look of gratitude mixed with surprise, as if he was looking at his own big cat that could go out and hunt by itself, full of a strange sense of relief. Medici, who could completely understand what Roland's gaze represented. He wanted to hit the boss again. "Didn't you say before that you wanted to help Ask suppress his other half of the soul, suppress the death uniqueness? You haven't forgotten about this, have you?" Given that he had never won an argument against a certain person, Medici chose to change the subject after enduring. "How could that be? I've been thinking about this all along. Otherwise, why would I bring little Kay and the others with me?" Roland retorted. As soon as his words fell, there was a knock on the door. "Lucifer, Medici, are you there?" It was Ask, who had received Roland's notification in advance and had come to the study. "Come in," Roland responded, beckoning Ask outside the door to enter. The study door was then opened, and Ask, who looked to be in good spirits, appeared before everyone. He first greeted Roland and Medici, then his gentle gaze fell upon the three youngsters, saying, "Long time no see, little Kay, Jack, Xiao Amon. It seems like you've been doing well during this time." Little Kay and the other two naturally quickly greeted Ask. For a moment, the atmosphere in the study was warm and harmonious. Roland then explained the reason for notifying Ask to come over this time and asked, "How is your condition now? If I help you suppress the other half of your soul, do you think you can successfully fuse with it?" Chapter 396, Little Red's Attitude Towards the Evernight Goddess. Ask is in a very good state now. On one hand, he has finally recovered most of his lost memories, no longer needing to be lost and confused, search for the past or seek an answer to, "Who am I?" as he once did. On the other hand, although the recovery of memories brought Ask some minor troubles, thanks to frequent meetings with his children, Lucifer's persona mask, the anchor points provided by Little Kay and others, and the Death Consul's own recognition, Ask was not overcome by the past, he still maintained himself. Furthermore, after taking down the numinous episcopate with Lucifer's help and fighting for the cause of reform, the last void deep within Ask's heart, the part he couldn't let go of due to past sins, was also filled. It can be said that the current Ask is very complete, although his daily life is busy, he lives a very fulfilling one. So, when faced with Roland's inquiry, Ask, though somewhat surprised, still described his state in an orderly manner, finally saying, "My own state is fine. If Lucifer, you can truly suppress my other half of the soul, I have more than half a chance of smoothly merging with it." This was not Ask showing off, but a conclusion he drew based on his own state and his interactions with his other half of the soul during this period. Thinking of this, Ask seemed to recall something else and added, "Actually, the success rate might be even higher. Your theory is correct. My other half of the soul has indeed been influenced by faith during this time, becoming more, how should I describe it? Perhaps a bit more gentle. The reason Roland wanted to change the death's doctrine before was not only to reform the numinous episcopate but also to test whether the change in believers' views on gods would affect the state of the artificial death that contained the uniqueness. Facts proved Roland's idea was correct. As a semi-involved party, Ask clearly felt the changes in the artificial death during this time. Although the other party still had little rationality and only instinct, compared to its previous cold appearance, its attitude had indeed become more gentle. Analogously, it transformed from a lion that would bite at the slightest provocation into a big cat that might allow you to gently touch its paw. Although the big cat is still fierce and might suddenly give you a swipe, there has indeed been a change. That's good. Roland raised an eyebrow, not surprised by Ask's words. He then looked at the other party and said, "So, do you want to merge with your other half of the soul today? Or wait a bit longer?" Roland wasn't in such a hurry to make Ask merge with his other half of the soul right now, mainly because today was indeed a good time. After all, Roland couldn't guarantee when he would next project into death, but if Ask wasn't in a hurry, Roland wouldn't mind waiting until next time. Ask didn't answer immediately. He probably thought for a few seconds, then nodded with a firm yet gentle gaze, saying, "I think I can, and New Year is approaching. I want to become stronger before then." "Good." Roland met his gaze, and feeling Ask's determination, he also nodded, no longer trying to persuade him, but just smiled and said, "Then I'll inform the Evernight goddess. She has some small tricks to deal with Salinger, which should be useful in the upcoming fusion. As the saying goes, everyone has their specialty. Although Roland is now death, he only possesses the relevant abilities. In the realm of dealing with Ask's scummy father, he certainly can't compare to the Evernight goddess, Salinger's old rival. Thank you for the trouble." Although Ask was a bit embarrassed, he didn't try to be strong in this regard. After all, while he wasn't entirely clear about all the tricks his father played on him, he knew very well how scummy his father was. Under such a major premise, it was better to be as stable as possible. Otherwise, his death wouldn't matter, but if death truly resurrected, it would be a big problem for Lucifer and them. Roland always acted decisively, so a moment later, the Evernight goddess's incarnation appeared in the study, causing varied expressions on the faces of the people in the room. Among them, the most composed, besides Roland, was of course Medici. He glanced at the Evernight goddess, with whom he had dealt quite a bit in the past, and said, whether sarcastically or teasingly, "When did you start doing charity, Knight? It's just a transaction. I thought Lucifer had told you about this." The Evernight goddess glanced at Medici, not getting angry, but just smiling. "Hey, that's truly your style." Medici let out a sudden laugh, his tone slightly playful, then continued, "Of course he told me about it, so I should advise you, play fewer small tricks. Some things he doesn't care about, whatever tricks you play, he won't care. Some things he does care about, if you really do something, your own death doesn't matter, but if it implicates this world, hey. It seems you've misunderstood me." The Evernight goddess seemed a bit helpless. Medici, on the other hand, pouted. He didn't actually dislike the Evernight goddess, but Medici knew deeply what a calculating existence the Evernight goddess was. This goddess, who achieved the Demon Wolf Family Bucket achievement in the second epic, became the leader of the Rose of Redemption in the third epic, and was the ultimate winner of the Four Emperors' War in the fourth epic, was like an unfathomable pool of water. You never knew how many schemes were hidden beneath her gentle false mask, only that she had almost won against everyone. Throughout these many years, many people died, many people lost, but only the Evernight goddess kept winning until now. Medici knew very well that even Adam was extremely wary of the Evernight goddess, and now the Evernight goddess might choose to bow her head because of Roland's miraculous nature, but who knew if she would scheme something behind the scenes, especially concerning the uniqueness of death. Medici could understand the Evernight goddess's concerns, but this didn't mean he would like to see the Evernight goddess scheme against Roland. As long as the little monster he served didn't go mad, he would remain his loyal master. Before the other party destroyed the world, Medici would be his most loyal guardian. Let alone the Evernight goddess, even if the sun god suddenly went mad and wanted to attack Roland, Medici would stop him. This is the Red Angel, he would not easily submit to anyone, but once he chose, it would be until death. The Evernight goddess naturally understood Medici's attitude, which made her show a rare expression of surprise, then looked at Roland, who was watching the show beside her, and said with a sigh, "You have a good subordinate." "Of course, Little Red is my most trusted aide, my most beloved confidant," Roland said without any embarrassment, even with a hint of pride as he spoke. Chapter 397, Little K, Night, and Ask. Xiao Amon seemed to have thought of something and looked at Roland, asking in confusion, "Isn't Bethel your trusted aide, Uncle Lucifer?" Roland didn't even twitch an eyebrow when he heard this, and said self-righteously, "Is there a possibility that there can be more than one trusted aide? They are all, of course, my close confidants. Why don't you just say your heart is a durian, and it's filled with close confidants?" Medici glanced at him, his words instantly familiar with their sarcastic tone. "What's a durian?" Ask, who was nearby, obviously hadn't had enough exposure to Roland and hadn't received enough information, so he showed a puzzled expression. Little K quickly lowered his voice to explain to Ask, and while explaining, the corner of his eye couldn't help but curiously glance at the Evernight goddess. This was the first time Little K had seen this legendary fellow transmigrator, so his curiosity was naturally unavoidable. Besides curiosity, Little K was also a bit guilty. After all, theoretically, Little K still held the identity of a Nighthawk's, though he was currently on vacation. The Evernight goddess naturally sensed Little K's gaze. She then looked over generously, sizing up the young man in front of her. This was the Lord of the Mysteries candidate the Evernight goddess had once favored. Although she admitted that before he showed potential, the Evernight goddess had only made a casual move and hadn't truly expected Little K to suddenly become the Lord of the Mysteries in the mere decade or so remaining until the apocalypse. Ultimately, the Evernight goddess was just a little unwilling to let Amon ascend to the position of Lord of the Mysteries. Regardless of how Amon had been transformed by Roland now, the former Amon truly wasn't a good person. It was difficult to trust him with the future of this world, not to mention that the Evernight goddess and Amon had a poor relationship, being almost entirely antagonistic throughout the fourth epic. Given the Evernight goddess's character, unless she had no other choice, how could she allow a hostile Lord of the Mysteries to emerge? And now, through Roland's attitude, the Evernight goddess had roughly guessed that this seemingly ordinary fellow transmigrator in the original fate had indeed accomplished something miraculous and become that great existence. She also knew that with Roland's intervention now, Little K might no longer choose such a fate. The Evernight goddess wasn't truly disappointed by this. After all, Bethel was a really good candidate. If he hadn't been corrupted by an outer god before, the Evernight goddess would likely have supported Bethel's ascension quite decisively. The Evernight goddess simply looked at Little K and suddenly said, "I'm very sorry." Huh. Little K was stunned for a moment, clearly not having fully processed it. "I'm very sorry for making you bear responsibilities that weren't yours in the original fate, but at that time, I probably had no other choice," the Evernight goddess continued, her voice gentle, reminiscent of a tranquil night. Little K pursed his lips upon hearing this. He looked at the Evernight goddess, seemingly organizing his thoughts, and said, "You don't need to apologize for something you haven't done. On the contrary, I should express my gratitude." Little K said earnestly, "Thank you, Your Excellency Evernight goddess. Without you, I might have become a sacrifice for the celestial worthy's revival the moment I transmigrated. It is because of your help that I am able to stand here." The Evernight goddess seemed to smile upon hearing this, then continued in her gentle voice, "I just didn't want the celestial worthy to revive. If you truly feel bad, just consider it that you owe me a favor." After she finished speaking, she didn't wait for Little K's reaction and looked directly at Ask, saying, "Long time no see, ask. Your current state is better than I imagined. Long time no see, Your Excellency Knight. Thank you very much for being willing to help me." This was naturally not the first time Ask had dealt with the Evernight Goddess, although as the Death Consul, his stance with the Evernight Goddess had almost always been antagonistic. "No need to thank me. I just made a deal with Lucifer. He is the one you should truly thank," the Evernight Goddess said with a smile. Ask was not surprised by this and instinctively looked at Roland. "There's no need for thanks. There's no need to be so polite between friends," Roland said with a smile. "Rather than words of gratitude, I'd prefer to see you appear before me as a complete individual. Of course, if you unfortunately lose to your divinity, I'll remember to write, 'He was once a good father,' on your tombstone." Roland's last sentence was half teasing, half serious. "Perhaps we could add, 'He lived.'" Ask paused, then smiled gently, his expression very serious. "Sounds pretty good." Roland seemed to think seriously for a second, then nodded, approving Ask's choice for the epitaph. The two of them discussed the inscription on the tombstone for a while, as if no one else was present, and finally, Ask himself personally decided on the third line of the epitaph. This, of course, didn't mean that if Ask failed to overcome his divinity, Roland would simply kill him. It meant that if the merged entity truly became the former divine puppet, then Ask's personality, born through 1,000 years of reincarnation, would have, in a sense, died. Ask is the Death Consul, but the Death Consul is not equal to Ask. The former encompasses the latter, just as a person's present encompasses their past, but the past is not equal to the present. Perhaps the divine puppet could once again possess humanity in the future, but no one could say that it would still become Ask. Just as the same soul, after having different experiences, may not grow into the same person. So, if Ask truly became a fleeting dream, Roland would erect a tombstone for him. "Lucifer, if I truly fail to overcome my divinity, and these more than 1,000 years of experience become a fleeting dream, becoming that former divine puppet." Ask's expression suddenly grew more serious after discussing his epitaph. He looked at Roland and said, "Then please help me convey a message to him." Ask smiled, his smile gentle with a hint of relief. Even a blank puppet can have a heart. "Perhaps he can no longer be me, but he can still possess a new self." Ask didn't dislike the former Death Consul. Perhaps he once rejected his cold and cruel self, but after truly interacting with the other party, Ask had long accepted that he was his past. Although they couldn't be equated due to these 1,000 years of experience, Ask still hoped that his former self could truly live. Roland quietly listened to his words, his expression also unusually serious. He nodded and said, "I understand. I will convey these to him." The atmosphere at this moment seemed somewhat heavy, but because of the principal's sense of relief, it didn't feel oppressive. Chapter 398, The Meeting of Two Asks. "All right, that's enough small talk. Now, let's go meet the other half of your soul, Ask," Roland said with a smile, dispelling the gloomy atmosphere in the room. Then, he seemed to recall something and looked at Little K, asking, "Did you bring Ask's copper whistle?" The copper whistle Mr. Azek once gifted to Little K was the key to opening the space where the artificial death resided, which was the Death's Mausoleum. "I brought it, it's right here." Little K quickly took out the copper whistle he cherished from his pocket. Roland nodded, then looked at Mr. Azek, who at this moment extended his hand, revealing a ring. That was the ring Death had left behind, once belonging to the Hell Admiral, and also a key to opening the Death's Mausoleum. Seeing that all the tools were ready, Roland said no more. He simply took the ring from Mr. Azek's hand, used his current death power to locate it, and brought the group near the Death's Mausoleum, somewhere in the Berserk Sea. The Berserk Sea was not calm at this moment. Although this sea area rarely had calm moments, it was particularly turbulent at this instant. As a genuine death, Roland merely sensed it slightly and easily found the location of a certain door. This door was clearly restricted. In addition to needing a key, it also required certain specific beings or bloodlines to open it. But for Roland at this moment, such a restriction was virtually non-existent. However, he didn't choose to break the door by force. Instead, he took Mr. Azek's copper whistle from Little K's hand and snapped his fingers. Snap! The surrounding colors seemed to change at this moment, and then a massive vortex appeared before everyone. Go in, inside is where death fell, and also where the other half of your soul, resides, Roland said with a smile. Mr. Azek led the way in, with the Evernight goddess following closely behind. Roland watched them enter the vortex, then seemed to think of something again. He glanced at the three little ones beside him and said, "Don't worry, this passage is very stable and won't make you feel uncomfortable." Compared to the half-baked passage opened by Mr. Azek in the original work, the door personally opened by Roland, the death, was naturally much more stable. "Understood, old guy, I still trust your skill," Jack nodded, pulling little Kay and jumping into the vortex. Amon followed them and jumped in as well. After everyone else had entered, Roland, wearing the Lucifer persona, finally entered the vortex. A moment later, he arrived inside a dark and gloomy mausoleum. It was clearly a mausoleum with a strong death-like style. Coffins of the deceased could be seen everywhere. Those deceased didn't look like ordinary people, each had rotten white feathers on their backs. At this moment, the others were standing beside these coffins. Some, like Amon, were examining the deceased inside the coffins, while others, like Mr. Azek, were looking towards the end of the tiered steps. Upon arriving at this mausoleum belonging to death, Mr. Azek felt a pull, an attraction from the depths of his soul. His soul instinctively yearned for fusion, drawing him to meet his other half. However, due to the preparations made during this period, Mr. Azek could barely control this instinctive desire to meet. He merely became slightly lost in thought, recalling the future Lucifer had once described to him. If it weren't for Lucifer, what would have happened if he, knowing nothing and never having met his past self, had rashly entered this mausoleum? Mr. Azek thought that he would probably be pulled towards the depths of the mausoleum. Perhaps he could resist at first, but as he got closer to his other self, he would definitely be unable to resist this attraction from the depths of his soul. Even if unwilling, he would only be able to walk towards his predetermined fate. Of course, according to Lucifer's description, that version of him probably had some luck, so he ultimately avoided an irreversible fate, choosing the slightly better outcome, abandoning the other half of his soul to preserve his personality but continuing to sink into reincarnation from then on. Was this a good ending? Mr. Azek couldn't say for sure, but at least he wasn't planning to escape now. He also had more leverage now to choose the better ending. Thinking this, Mr. Azek looked at Lucifer and sincerely said, "Thank you for giving me the chance to choose my destiny, Lucifer." Roland glanced at him upon hearing this, smiled, and said, "Then prove to me that the opportunity I gave you was not in vain." Then Roland seemed to think of something again, looked at the three little ones beside him, and snapped his fingers. A translucent bubble enveloped the three little ones at this moment. This was clearly a form of protection. After all, while Jack and Amon might be fine, little K was still a genuine sequence 6 and couldn't directly witness the mythical creature form of artificial death. Roland also had to guard against any pollution that might be in the mausoleum, so he naturally added an extra layer of protection for them. "Let's go, don't keep someone waiting," Roland then said with a smile. The group then followed the steps deeper into the mausoleum. After passing through a thick black mist, they soon saw a giant feathered serpent. It was undoubtedly a colossal creature, so massive that it seemed capable of occupying an island. It looked somewhat like a snake, yet it had feathers. However, the scales on its tail were difficult to discern as either black or green. In any case, they gave off a chilling sensation, and the feathers were not pure white but rather stained with faint yellow oil. And what was most striking was naturally the face at the top of the feathered serpent's body. It was a face incredibly similar to Mr. Azek's, only colder and appearing somewhat unintelligent. This is Mr. Azek's other half of his soul. Little K stared at the colossal creature before him. Protected by the bubble's power, he naturally didn't suffer any ill effects from directly looking at the mythical creature, but his expression was already somewhat ineffable. This was mainly because the feathered serpent genuinely had a somewhat indescribable quality, appearing both beautiful and terrifying. Mr. Azek himself swayed at this moment. A severe headache made him instinctively reach out and cover his head. At the very moment he truly met his other half, some lost memories were beginning to resurface. Mr. Azek finally remembered how his soul had been forcibly pulled out of his body by death and then cut into two halves, how Salinger had integrated one half of his soul with death's uniqueness, leaving it in this mausoleum, while the other half merged with a strange golden ornament and returned to his body. And at this moment, sensing his approach, Mr. Azek's other half of his soul clearly reacted. The giant feathered serpent, driven by instinct, looked at Mr. Azek. It also yearned to become one with Mr. Azek, even if it had no rationality, only instinct left. Chapter 399, Becoming King of Angels, Ask. No, Ask instinctively shook his head, resisting the attraction, but even though his rationality could barely be maintained, Ask's body reacted at this moment, and some tiny black scales grew on his body surface. Then, a bloody gash suddenly split open on Ask's forehead, followed by a golden light blooming forth. A golden ornament, very similar in shape to a phoenix, transformed from illusory to real at this moment. The appearance of the golden ornament clearly intensified Ask's pain and urged him towards his other half of the soul. Death's old scheme was revealed at this moment. If there were no external obstructions, even if Ask's current state was decent, Salinger would inevitably be reborn within his body the moment he fused with his other half of the soul, with Death's uniqueness. However, before Ask stepped towards the feathered serpent, a hand lightly grasped the golden phoenix ornament. The next second, the golden light was suppressed, and Ask felt something completely stripped from his body. This brought greater pain, but then this pain was smoothed over by some power. Roland held the phoenix ornament in his hand and then scrutinized this item, which could be said to have been passed down for several generations, with interest. If he remembered correctly, this item originally belonged to a phoenix ancestor, then fell into Death's hands, and was now integrated into Ask's soul by Death. From this perspective, it was indeed an old artifact. While studying the phoenix ornament, Roland's other hand rested on Ask's shoulder, using Death's power to nourish his incomplete soul. In terms of spiritual bodies, the Death pathway is truly specialized. As Roland made his move, Evernight Goddess was not idle either. Her target was not the phoenix ornament, but the massive feathered serpent coiled in front. Darkness descended at this moment, bringing a peculiar tranquility. The feathered serpent seemed affected by this tranquility, its originally wide-open eyes slowly closed, and the cold expression on its face softened at this moment, appearing to have fallen into a beautiful dream. Evernight Goddess then extended her hand, pressing it gently on the massive feathered serpent's forehead. She clearly did something, because the next second, the feathered serpent suddenly twitched, seemingly wanting to open its eyes and break free from the beautiful dream, but it was firmly held down by Evernight Goddess. Gradually, the feathered serpent's struggles subsided, and Evernight Goddess also withdrew her hand at this time. Faintly, some oily traces could be seen on her fingertips. These oily stains seemed to want to further infect her, but Evernight Goddess merely curled her lips, and all the oil stains vanished in an instant. The next second, the feathered serpent opened its eyes again. There was still not much rationality in its eyes, but compared to its previous coldness, the feathered serpent now appeared more naive, like a pure animal. Evernight Goddess clearly anticipated this. A talisman-like object then appeared in her hand. The next second, the power of the talisman was activated, and Evernight Goddess turned to look at Roland and the others, saying, "I have stripped most of Salinger's power from his body, but his divinity and madness will not be suppressed because of this. If he wants to survive, he still has to defeat his other half." "Well done." Roland nodded in affirmation. He then walked towards the feathered serpent and, under the feathered serpent's naive gaze, reached out and stroked some of its scales. "It's indeed cold," Roland commented. Then, Death's power resonated with the uniqueness on the feathered serpent at this moment. It was evident that even if only instinct remained, the feathered serpent was still somewhat confused at this moment. Roland smiled and took out another item. It was a sealed artifact that once belonged to Bernadette, a grade 0 sealed artifact crafted by Rosal for his daughter, whose raw material was a sequence 1 characteristic from the Death pathway. Roland had acquired this characteristic at some unknown time. He now turned his head to look at Ask, who had also walked to the feathered serpent's side, and said, "Then choose, Ask. Do you want to simply fuse with your other half of the soul, or do you want me to help you suppress them and help you become a king of angels?" This might seem absurd and very aggressive. If it were any other sequence too, doing so would be no different from courting death, but for Ask, it was indeed possible. His other half of the soul had long fused with Death's uniqueness, even possessing the pseudo-death rank, and Ask, who had participated in the Pale disaster, had long completed the ritual to advance to Pale Emperor. Most crucially, with Roland, the genuine death, here, he could maximally help Ask suppress the power of the uniqueness and the sequence 1 characteristic. The existence of Evernight Goddess was another guarantee, a guarantee that Salinger would not be reborn. Of course, even if Evernight Goddess proved unreliable this time, Roland could still act as a remedy. After all, as the current death, he could suppress a death who had already perished. This was the perfect alignment of timing, location, and people. It could be said that there was no better moment than now for Ask to accommodate death's uniqueness and become an king of angels. Even if it meant risk, if this opportunity was missed and Ask was simply separated from death's uniqueness, then it would not be so easy for him to re-accommodate the uniqueness later. Ask's gaze fell upon the pale emperor characteristic in Roland's hand, clearly surprised. He then looked at the naive-eyed feathered serpent. Ask looked into the eyes of his other half of the soul. He suddenly smiled and said, Death Consul once wondered if it was because he wasn't strong enough that he couldn't possess the beautiful emotions described in those stories. Now I know that beautiful emotions don't require great power to possess, but, Ask paused here, his gaze falling on the phoenix ornament in Roland's other hand, then looking at Evernight Goddess who had easily suppressed the feathered serpent, and finally returning to Roland, saying, If I don't have enough power, I cannot protect everything I possess. As a sequence 2, he was too weak, so much so that he could only constantly lose. Therefore, Ask chose greater power, to protect everything he loved. Even if this means you have a greater chance of losing. Roland met his gaze and asked. At least I believe that with you, with all of you here, death will not be reborn within me, and I also believe in myself, I will overcome the divinity and survive. Ask smiled as he said this, his smile gentle. He suddenly looked at Little K and the others nearby, who were nervously watching him, and then continued. Even if I truly disappear, Death Consul will protect you for me. He is a good child, but he never had a choice before. I believe that with you, Lucifer, he will become that guardian. Chapter 400, The Story of Death Consul. Ask had a very long dream. The dream began with a cold darkness. In that darkness, Ask felt no warmth, only coldness, the aura of death, and boundless silence. The Ask in the dream was not yet the gentle history teacher of later generations, but an ignorant young feathered serpent. The young feathered serpent understood nothing, not even the concepts of fire and the sun god, yet at one moment, he still had the thought, it's so cold. After an unknown period of such dark and cold days, they suddenly ended one day. The young feathered serpent finally opened his eyes in the real world. This was his first sight after birth, but what he saw was not a couple joyfully welcoming their child, but a man's critical and cold gaze. An instinct from his bloodline made Ask understand that the man before him was his father, someone he should be close to, but the instinct for survival made him cower. The feathered serpent cub's spiritual intuition kept sounding alarms, warning Ask that death might descend at any moment, and that the other party might kill him. Why? In his ignorance, the feathered serpent cub felt confused, but he dared not ask. Finally, after a silence that terrified and suffocated the feathered serpent cub, the man withdrew his gaze and uttered a comment. Not bad. The tone was not one of evaluating his own child, but rather of evaluating a useful tool. And the feathered serpent cub survived because of this comment, not meeting the end of his life before even understanding what the world was like, unlike many of his siblings. But was this truly a fortunate thing? Ask did not know, only that the feathered serpent cub in the dream was later arranged by the man to learn various knowledge and to compete with his surviving siblings. The Byron Emperor had no so-called familial affection, all of Death's descendants could only determine the victor through brutal struggle. The excellent ones were further cultivated, while the defeated ones often never appeared before others again. And the young Ask, as someone Death deemed not bad, undoubtedly became the outstanding one among all the descendants, and even the final victor. Thus, Death crowned him, and Death Governor was born. Ask, you truly are my most outstanding descendant. On that day in the dream, the man who was Ask's father rarely showed a satisfied smile towards his descendant, while Death Governor, kneeling on one knee before him to receive the coronation, wore a humble expression, with only his lowered eyes devoid of any emotion. As the one dreaming, Ask found it hard to say what Death Governor was thinking at that moment, but Ask felt he was probably not happy. But whether Ask was happy or not, the dream continued, and Death Governor became the ruler of the Balaam Empire, though Ask felt it might be more reasonable to call Death Governor a tool for handling imperial affairs. All his power stemmed from Death. Death Governor could only do what the other party allowed, manipulated like a puppet on strings, with neither freedom nor self. Divine puppet, occasionally, looking at himself in the dream, looking at the reflection in the mirror, Ask would vaguely think of this term, even if he couldn't quite recall who he had heard describe it that way. But does a divine puppet truly have no self at all? Ask thought not, because besides handling various matters like a rigid political robot, Death Governor would also read various wonderful stories. Some of these stories were purely folk legends, some were fairy tales for children, and some were high-sequence gossip from other countries. As Death Governor, the Feathered Serpent had no need to read these stories, but he was indeed engrossed in them, reading the books over and over again, and then, during a stolen moment of leisure in the afternoon, silently contemplating what so-called kinship, friendship, and love truly were. Death Governor had never seen such things in reality, even though he had many siblings, and even though countless people in the Empire admired Death Governor and wished to become imperial consorts. So sometimes Ask would wonder, are these so-called emotions truly real? Did they only exist in fabricated stories, or are they also real in reality? Death Governor felt that the answer was likely the latter. After all, the works from Mr. Door that circulated from the Tudor Empire were highly authentic, and in those stories, those high sequences also possessed emotions, kinship, friendship, and even love. So Ask would wonder again, why, as a high sequence himself, could he not possess these? Was it because he was not strong enough? Death Governor did not know, because no one would give him the answer to this question. Until one afternoon, a perfectly ordinary afternoon for Death Governor to steal some leisure, he merely blinked and saw a strange young man, while another him sat opposite. Effortlessly, Death Governor guessed the truth. He had arrived in the future, 1,000 years in the future. And in this future, he finally broke free from Death's shackles. Although he still couldn't be called completely free, he gained a self through the long cycle of reincarnation, and also possessed those emotions he had only seen in stories. How wonderful! Death Governor couldn't help but think this way. The emotionless puppet felt satisfied for the first time, on this ordinary yet extraordinary afternoon. Even though Death Governor only stayed in the future for a very short time, upon returning to his own era, he was still very happy, for the self who finally possessed a self, and for the gift brought back from the future. That gift allowed Death Governor to have more self, even suppressing many of Death's influences on him. The remaining days at this moment finally seemed to hold anticipation and light. Death Governor continued his life under these circumstances. He would occasionally return to the future, but more often he could only remain in the cold palace, handling the complex official duties. However, Death Governor did not feel dissatisfied because of this. For him, even a brief moment of beauty was enough to sustain him through long years. Death Governor had not been without thoughts of resistance, but the gap between Sequence 2 and Sequence 0 was too vast, and the bloodline connection also rendered Death Governor powerless to resist before death. So he could only remain silent, carefully hiding his meager humanity, maintaining a cold facade, and continuing to serve as Death's most satisfactory descendant. Even though Death Governor was well aware that this most satisfactory descendant of his was also Death's most satisfactory resurrection vessel. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.